Ben, you good? Jesse? All right. All right. Okay, everybody. We will go ahead and call to order the Planning and Zoning Commission meeting for Tuesday, September 12th, 2023. Go ahead with the roll call.
Chairman Ryan Green.
Here.
Jesse Koppel.
Here.
Ben Lee.
Here.
Walter Robb. Steve Dyer.
All right, we will go with the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right, we will go ahead and open at this time for public comment that is not on tonight's agenda. Is there any public comment? This would be about private zoning matters, things of that nature. And hearing none, we will go ahead and move forward to the approval of the minutes from August 9th, 2023 and August 22nd, 2023. And I'll make a motion to approve those in a block.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. And we will go ahead and move on to application number Z23-175, the zoning map amendment and preliminary development plan. First, just to give you guys a little background on this, we will go ahead and open up to our staff for some background, and then to our applicant, and then I will get to public comment as soon as I can, because I know a number of you have some things on this. So we'll go ahead and open up to our staff.
All right. So it seems like a pretty typical zoning meeting tonight. We're all here for the shed variance. No. So just as some background, Johnstown has been well aware that it was going to have some development pressures. We've been doing our best to kind of stay in front of it. And just to point out how we kind of got to where we're at today, we did do a PD district adoption to our code roughly around July, which allowed for a different way to view development in a larger scale master planning level. The other piece of that is we are currently going through our comprehensive plan. It is not all the way processed and all the way finished. We knew that going into it when we started this initiative last year. Typically comprehensive plans take, usually a 12-month process. Ours is no exception. But being aware of the development pressures that exist, MKSK, through their recommendation, came up with a parallel plan that allowed for us to address some of the issues that we would be facing maybe more immediately, and those are the external areas of Johnstown. So just recently, council adopted a growth framework roughly about a month ago, and this is helpful for us to be able to look at things at a higher level and have some guide rails inside of that. They've also looked at a future land use map, and that was adopted about a month ago as well. And from there, I'm going to kick it over to Trevor and Chris, acting as our city planners, but obviously through MKSK's planning firm, they're going to guide us. Trevor has background in this. He's done this many municipalities before, and Chris, his background is he's got all that gray hair. So he's been here, walked this, and we're in good hands.
Good evening, everyone. I wanted to quickly just start with an overview of the Plan Development District, which is the mechanism that is being requested to be used to rezone the property subject to this request, which is about 407 acres, basically adjacent to the southern border of Johnstown. And so this is a request to rezone. This is not directly tied to the annexation request that's been submitted. However, this is a request to rezone and apply a new zoning district to the properties that were illustrated on the screen. This rezoning is requesting to use the plan development tool, which, to Sean's point, was just recently developed by the city. Plan developments are used generally throughout the planning world to facilitate developments that have multiple uses or large scale, things of that nature. And really allow for flexibility on behalf of an applicant and of a city to be able to negotiate development standards, uses, things of that nature in a public and open setting. Along with that, to accommodate the flexibility, are come some significant submittal requirements, so you'll see multiple different items that the applicant has provided. There's a lengthy zoning text along with a series of maps that really convey the idea of what they're trying to produce and what they're requesting be approved. And so with that, if this is approved, if the request is ultimately approved, the zoning text and the associated master plan essentially become a unique zoning district only applicable to these properties that are part of this plan development. So they won't be applicable necessarily to any other property in Johnstown, but they will be regulatory for those properties within this PD. And just to elaborate a little bit further on the components of that plan development, so basically it's a twofold set of regulations. The PD zoning text, which is like your traditional zoning code or similar to your traditional zoning code, that is essentially written narrative with photos and diagrams, things like that that help describe setbacks, uses, any restrictions of use, open space, screening, streets, a wide variety of those sorts of things. And then to accompany that and help for the future to review development as it comes along, things like that, you have a preliminary master plan which generally establishes where uses go, access points, circulation, utility quarters, things of that nature. But before any development can actually happen, the applicant must come back and request a final master plan for each specific area that they want to develop within that overall master plan. And so this is not the end all for this request. They will have to come back and request those final master plans, which will go through a similar public hearing process that we're going through this evening. There are a series of plan approval criteria established in the code. The plan development code resides in chapter 1164 of the city's codified ordinances. The preliminary development plan, which is subject of this request, this rezoning request, has a total of 13 of those criteria to review. Those are on pages, this is more for the members of the P&Z and the public, but basically pages 15 through 17 of ordinance 10-2022 establish the review criteria, and any decision related to this plan development must be based upon those criteria. We have some recommended discussion topics. However, you are more than welcome, everyone, to to ask and request information for what you want. But we felt like this being the preliminary master plan and more of a high-level review of this document, that really the priority discussion topics would be location and types of uses, density and intensity of those uses, vehicular and pedestrian circulation and access routes, utility corridors, and then parks and open space provisions generally. Not what does this park look like, but things like where generally will open space be located, other opportunities for payment in lieu, things like that. And this wouldn't be detail specific, but just general discussion topics. So with that, I know that was brief. If the P&Z has any questions now, just procedurally, I will happily answer those. But if not, I'm going to turn it over to.
One more thing, just want to make sure everyone's clear on this. So this is the first step in the preliminary development plan. We're in front of the Planning Commission. The Planning Commission serves as a recommending body. It is our understanding that the applicant wants to have this meeting and have conversation, is not asking for action tonight, which means we assume it will be a requested table and there will be a follow-up meeting of this body. At some point, this body must make a recommendation, approval with conditions or denial. Whatever that recommendation that comes out of this body will go to City Council. City Council will have a public meeting and they have the final say on approving the rezoning.
No, that's all accurate.
And with that, that's all I have for now.
All right, we will go ahead at this time and bring up our applicant.
Give us a moment to get set up with the
Sure.
computer here. Can everyone hear me? Okay.
You have a presentation that you put together.
While you're setting up, I'm going to take 30 seconds for a plug. Sean mentioned that we are working on updating the City of Johnstown's comprehensive plan. We are scheduling our next public meeting with the community on Wednesday this month, September 27th. Please, if you're interested, come. We are talking about all things Johnstown. We're not trying to have a discussion about this development. That's what these meetings are for, but we are talking about the future of Johnstown, the things you want to see, amenities, direction, policy, those kinds of things. And would love to have you, your friends, neighbors, coworkers, come to that meeting. The more input we get, the better this plan's gonna be.
Can you repeat that date, please?
And time.
September 27th?
It's 6:30,
At
correct,
6:30.
Teresa? There you go. We'll have that posted on the website.
Be here.
Yes, and it will be here
In this room.
in this very room.
Thank you.
You bet.
All right, if you'd proceed with the
Thank you very
presentation.
much, members of the commission. My name is Aaron Underhill. I'm a zoning attorney with the law firm of Underhill and Hodge in New Albany. With me this evening are Tom Ruby and Jamie McNally of the New Albany Company and the Johnstown Land Company, which we formed to spearhead this venture. It is an affiliated entity of the New Albany Company. So I'm going to give a presentation. I'm going to bring these gentlemen up as you have questions for us, and we'll handle them based on our different areas of expertise. And hope to have another engaging dialogue this evening. You'll recall that we were here not too long ago, a few weeks ago, informally, and subsequent to that informal presentation, very shortly thereafter, we filed the formal application. While we are here in that realm with a formal application before you this evening, as Chris mentioned, we do not expect a vote, and we see you have two members absent anyway, so we know they'll want to weigh in. So we expect to be back at your next meeting, which I believe is the 26th. What have we been doing since the last meeting? Well, we mentioned that we wanted to really engage the different stakeholders, and we've been meeting with Sean and MKSK. We've had a call today to discuss some of the particulars of this zoning proposal. We have met with Dr. Philip Wagner and a couple of school board members to provide some data to support what we believe will be the impact on the school district from this proposal, both financially and from an enrollment standpoint. I hope to get into some of that here in a little while. And we have continued to collect data in support of our project and what we believe is going to bring both financially for the city and the school district. And as I mentioned last time, we want to share with you as much objective data from like communities and like projects that we can in order to not just ask you to trust us. We want to demonstrate to you that either we have done this before or it's been done somewhere else, and that it will yield the result that we're trying to propose to you. The market for significant economic development projects remains extremely strong for obvious reasons, especially in this location. We remain confident that Johnstown is at the precipice of a significant opportunity that will strengthen not only its fiscal health, but that of the school district and other stakeholders and public entities. And additionally, we believe will bring new opportunities to small businesses and individuals in your community to have job opportunities, and as I mentioned last time, again, for generations to come. So this is really a transformational area, and being that we're on the doorstep of such a significant project, I think that it's very obvious that not only was the market strong for this area before Intel was announced, but with it here, it just really solidifies what the opportunities are. For many years, as long as I can remember, the nation and its politicians have been adamant about bringing manufacturing jobs back to the United States. Nobody can argue that these jobs are very important and are part of the fabric of what our nation is. But one of the biggest projects that Ohio has ever seen, or America rarely sees, ends up in your proverbial backyard. It can be startling. We understand that. A strange mix of emotions comes to the local community. Fear of the unknown, optimism about a once-in-a-generation opportunity, and skepticism about whether promises, predictions, and projections are too good to be true. But here's the thing. The land we are talking about tonight is one of the most uniquely positioned in the entire country. An ecosystem of suppliers, businesses, and mixed-use development is more than just appropriate at this location. It is necessary and essential to support Intel, its campus, and its employees. Make no mistake, these uses and developments are going to happen in this area. As I mentioned last time, it is an incredible opportunity that Johnstown has in front of it. influence and control over uses and development standards as part of a master plan over hundreds of acres is right before you. Cohesive planning is at your fingertips rather than disjointed planning. Unified standards can be put in place rather than dozens of zoning applications being heard over many months for your consideration, none of which have any direct relationship to one another. Choreographed correctly, the financial impacts to this community will be overwhelmingly positive and possibly transformational. For example, our projections based on actual data and experiences in the New Albany Business Park, right next door, are that a 25-acre light industrial development can be expected to generate $5.6 million of annual payroll in today's dollars. This is based on real average data. A 35-acre data center site will generate over $310,000 a year in new community authority assessment revenue on its own, and even in conjunction with an abatement of taxes otherwise. So if you remember, we are committing as part of this project to partner with the city of Johnstown to create a new community authority, which is a voluntary charge on this district only, and possibly could be applied to other new development in the future. But 9.75 mils of a voluntary tax assessment that can be used to help pay for and finance infrastructure. Now consider that our proposal has over 251 acres, even if sub-area 5, if you'll recall, where we've given ourselves a little flexibility, is taken out of the mix. There would be over 251 acres set aside for these types of uses. So the math very easily becomes impressive. I'm sure there's a segment of the population that wonders, when will Johnstown and our school district get to reap the benefits of all of this development? Most don't know that approximately 4,500 acres of the New Albany Business Park is located within the Johnstown Monroe School District, even though it is within the city of New Albany. Through a longstanding agreement between the district and New Albany, the city, the district is receiving a significant revenue stream from these projects today, and as tax abatements burn off as time goes on in the future, the numbers will be staggering. This planned district will only add to these financial benefits. Now, as to the city, it finds itself in a position that most other municipalities would envy. Smaller communities usually must scratch and claw to attract even one major business within a 5 to 10 year period. This site is situated such that it has the potential to become a business park on its own that is likely to attract more economic development in that same 5 to 10 year window than most communities will ever see in their entire histories. This has the real potential to bolster the community's amenities and services to a level that is Now, it's likely that most people can get behind this type of development, and probably even some of the commercial uses we're proposing, such as restaurants and entertainment opportunities and other services. I'm not blind to the fact, though, that new residential development is rarely welcomed in a community. It's looked upon with a lot of skepticism. Each year, I present at least a dozen residential projects in the same zoning forum throughout communities in central Ohio, and with the exception of a select few, citizens really want to chase me out of town every time I present one. But if these are done properly, they can be additive to a community, and as we have mentioned previously, they are part of a larger economic development strategy and are really important to attracting the types of jobs that your community is going to want to see. So with that, I'd like to take another look. Our slideshow presentation is not nearly as long as last time, so sit back but don't relax too much, and we want to go through a few slides here. One item that's been interesting to us is, we had to come up with a name for this planned district, and we came up with the Johnstown Gateway. We're hearing from different places that that's maybe not the name that everybody wants, so we are open to any and all ideas that the public would want to propose, or this commission or the council. We wanted it to convey a message of excitement and opportunity. Calling it the Johnstown Southwest PD District didn't excite anybody. So we're open as we move forward to hearing your thoughts in that regard. MKSK's plan that Sean mentioned is very high level in terms of identifying various areas for preservation, housing, and an economic development of which housing is a part, even according to this framework plan. And in purple here is generally the area just north of Intel, and encompasses a portion of which is our project, which is kind of to the southeast of 62 there and southwest of Duncan Plains Road. north of Green Chapel, so we're in that purple area. So we believe that while MKSK's plan is adopted by the city is at a very high level, this proposal meets the spirit and intent. Wanted to reiterate that as we go through our sub-area plan and where we propose the different types of uses, that a lot of these decisions are based largely on the topography of a site, where there are major environmental elements, where the roadway network is, et cetera. So if you see on the left-hand side, which would be the western portion of the property, it talks about large flat fields. As you can imagine, these larger uses, such as the Intels of the world, like to be on flat farmland, and that really lends itself to these types of uses. So that's exactly where we're proposing these more major economic development types of uses. As you go eastward, the more of the mixed use and residential components are where they're going to be located in those areas. That's for a number of reasons. One, we're at the front door of Intel, and there'll be a lot of traffic that we think can be captured right across the street. Frankly, is going to be necessary to serve people at their lunch hour, after work, et cetera. And also these mixed use and residential areas really will take advantage of some of these natural features like the streams and some of the treat areas that we're showing here. This shows you in a little more detail just a bubble with what we call data center / industrial, and then one mixed use bubble layout that you can see here just to the north of Green Chapel and to the west of Mink. Again, anything we're showing you tonight is very conceptual. We're not intending at the moment to come in here with specific plans for you to approve during the zoning process, but as Trevor mentioned, we'll be here time and time again over the years with actual proposals that have to demonstrate compliance with this underlying zoning in order for you or other boards or city council to approve. This is looking southward at that Green Chapel roundabout that's just gone in, and looking to one of the office buildings here in the foreground of Intel. This is intended to demonstrate sort of the scale of the use across the street that is sort of guiding our design on the north side. Oh, just gotta catch up here. Another look more closely at an Intel building, and projected 3,000 new employees just in their phase one. So here's our sub-area plan. Went through this in some detail last time. We were at 417 acres, I think, when we were here previously. We're at 407 now, and the reason for that is that we have some of the properties under ownership of our company or its affiliates. We have others that are in contract. There was a property in particular that we weren't comfortable with where we were contractually to include in this project, and so we dropped it from this proposal. That brought us down to 407 acres, so we've subtracted 10. Sub-area number one there in the greenish sort of area is 182.7 acres, and that's where we'll start. It's the lion's share of the industrial and economic development sort of part of the site. The permitted uses are listed here. They are things that you see out in this area already. Would not allow other things unless they were sort of in a supporting role in a building, like you can have a Starbucks in an office building, for instance, but you wouldn't see a standalone Starbucks in this sub-area. It will be the types of buildings and uses that you see here. Sub-area 2 is just to the north of Duncan Plains Road, east of its intersection with 62. More of the same uses here. There's a little bit of different development standards here just based on location, but we also have an individual user called Huntington Solutions that is in contract to purchase the Port Authority property. They have proposed 2 buildings here. And we have divided the sub-area into 2A and 2B because this site plan, we wanted to represent what they were looking to do here. We also provided some architecture that they're proposing. Want to be clear that this is not Huntington Bank. I think I saw somewhere something about it was Huntington Bank. It's not, it's Huntington Solutions, and they have nothing to do with the financial industry. They're more of the industrial type uses that they're involved with. Sub-area 3, you can see here, is sort of central to the site on the east side. It is 70-plus acres. This would be the only location where a pure multifamily project would be permitted. Going to get into this here shortly, but we are proposing a total of 3 units per gross acre of multifamily residential. The only place where some of that could stand alone would be in sub-area 3. And then in sub-area 4, it will be, sub-area 4, is that?
Yeah, it's.
Okay, it's later. Okay. Anyway, I'm gonna talk, sub-area 4 is just to the south of 3 here. It will be a requirement that there is mixed use there. That mixed use can come up into, to include half of the acreage of sub-area 3 as well. The mixed use component, the requirement in the zoning text that we've given you is that in order to qualify as mixed use, a plan with multifamily residential would need to also include buildings and space for up to for at least 2 other uses, so that you ensure that you're not just getting the multifamily residential in that context, but you're getting things like restaurants, small offices, medical office, et cetera. So I mentioned the multifamily earlier, and the fact that residential gives people pause. We believe that this use is part and parcel to us being able to be successful and to really generate the other opportunities that are a little sexier, so to speak. I wanted to point out that the current code in Johnstown has these requirements. And these are minimum amounts of living area. So 1 bedroom, 1,100 square feet, 2 bedrooms, 1,350, and 3 bedrooms, 1,700 square feet. In today's market, in the market that we're trying to capture, which is one where we're trying to serve the young professionals that will be working in the area, these minimums would never be met, it would never be built. And so to the extent that Johnstown today has product that is generating a lot of residents and children living there, that's largely a result of these minimums in my mind. So one thing that we've done is we've reduced the minimums to a really large extent in our zoning text to allow these smaller units to be built, and you know, that way we can override the code, and I think it will really limit the occupancy of the units we're proposing, and therefore it distinguishes it from anything you've seen in the community to date. Here, Jamie, I'm going to have you get up here and talk for a moment about these layouts of these apartments.
Yeah, as Aaron pointed out, the minimum for a 1-bedroom in Johnstown right now is 1,100 square feet. The target demographic for the development for the residential will be geared towards young professionals at Intel. And, you know, these apartments layouts will probably be somewhere around the 600 to 700 square foot range. And we would be most likely willing to commit to limit the number of occupants per bedroom, barring that doesn't violate fair housing. We've been studying a lot more about the impact that the residential has on the school district as well. So, but this is just an example of what we think the market would yield for young professionals. Most likely the target demographic would be the 22 to 35-year-old young professional working at Intel. So I appreciate that.
So we understand the impact financially on the school district is important to evaluate, and as well as you know, limiting the concerns on capacity. I would not say that we're intentionally setting out not to have families here, because that would violate fair housing laws, but we are, in fact, we do have a target market, which is a young professional which typically doesn't have children. So, you know, we're trying to understand ways that under the law where we can make commitments to you all that would ensure that you're getting the product we're trying to tell you we're going to deliver. Oh, here's sub-area 4.
So is that an interpretation of the fair housing law that you can limit the number of occupants per bedroom?
right? There is a guidance from HUD that says that on its face, you know, a limit of 2 persons per bed, 2 occupants per bedroom is presumed to be legal and not in violation of the fair housing laws. There are exceptions, and it's fact specific, so I need to work with Thad and his team to understand that, you know, what the commitments we make are not discriminatory.
Yeah, I like that. See if it's legal.
So sub-area 4 here is what I mentioned before. It's 60 acres northwest of the intersection of Mink and Green Chapel. You know, mixed use in our mind can be different things. It will be a mix of residential and non-residential uses. That can be either vertically integrated, meaning things like shops on the first floor with residential units above, or horizontally integrated, meaning maybe you have a use here that's across the street from a different use over here. And so this is just one character image of what something like that could look like. A little lag here. Okay, so, you know, we wanted to, you know, Leafy Dell Apartments, I think, is one of the newer communities here, and has a lot of great amenities and targets a certain market. This is really not what we're going for here. We wanted to kind of demonstrate what that was versus some of the other case studies in other areas we've investigated. Interestingly, this is Bridge Park in Dublin. I don't want anybody to think this is going to be Bridge Park necessarily, but they have, let's see,
About 700 units and 13 units.
700 units. Are those all of them or something percent?
Those are the 4 rental.
700 for-rent units in Bridge Park, and we contacted the developer Crawford Wayne. They have 13 students. So that's interesting. Similarly, Grandview Yard, which does have some for-sale product, townhomes, et cetera, included, has, now I can give you this
That's
number.
1,300 rental units, and they have 22 child age students. Or
1,300 rental units, 22 students?
22 school-age students.
School-age students.
Yeah. And that's confirmed through the city of Grandview, or Grandview Heights, yeah.
So these are what we're trying to design to get to a similar product type, and those are real-world examples of the sorts of student yields that are coming out of those proposals, or those existing projects.
Yeah, Aaron, when we talk about the yield too, we have to keep in mind the product type, because not all apartments are equal and not all rental units are equal. So as we're talking more with third-party consultants about projections towards the impact of the school district, for example, one way that the industry is moving is, rather than saying X number of students per unit, it's X number of students per unit based on the product type. So the product type, depending on if you're doing luxury apartment or studios or 1-bedrooms, that could vary the number as well. So it's not quite just a blanket average as these analytics get more sophisticated, so.
Just one more project here. This is Jeffrey Park, which is near downtown Columbus. This one, I'm gonna try to read myself. Do we have that one?
We don't, but it's a good case study. Oh, yeah.
Did you guys provide a formula for how many students do you anticipate, like, per design type? Did you was that in here?
We do. We're working on a draft of that as well.
Okay.
We want to be able to project an estimate about what the number of children we would yield, as well as a ramp-up schedule as well, because these units won't be coming online all at once either. So we wouldn't want to do that ourselves either, and I don't think the market would support that. You know, the Jeffrey Park example is another example in Italian Village. If you get to walk it, they establish a pretty good sense of community as well, where there's some pockets of retail, and it's also, their amenities are open to the public as well. It's not just closed off, like the gyms are open to you don't have to live in their apartment community to belong to the gym there either. So they do a good job of creating a sense of community and connection with the neighboring amenities. So there's probably gonna be bits and pieces that we take from other communities or, you know, aspects of different projects around Central Ohio that we like and some that we don't like.
So although sub-area 4 may be all submitted for final approval here at one time, in one phase, there might be a separate plan submitted on the build-out timeline, basically. Is that the right
Yeah,
understanding?
I think that we're, you know, in our minds, 250 to 300 units online at a time within about an 18-month period is what we would see happening. And if we do much more than that, we start sort of pirating from within our own projects. So you want to get the first project leased up so it's successful before you start the next one. So we're investigating ways, and we're working with Dr. Wagner and his board on trying to find ways where we can make sure that this isn't happening all at once, and we expect it to be more of a 7 to 10 year sort of build out until they're all fully occupied. I would also say that with these examples and some others that we're working on, we're coming up with a number of 0.06 students per unit. And here that's a loaded question, depends on bedrooms, but if you'll recall, we're committing to 95% of the units being either 1 or 2 bedrooms, and only 5%, we think we need a little bit of a mix, will be 3-bedroom apartments. And so the number out of the gate preliminarily that the school district is verifying, we continue to work with them and communicate, but it's 0.06 students per unit. Sub-area 5 is just to the east of the intersection of Clover Valley and Green Chapel. And it is 25.7 acres. This is, I think, the area where we lopped off some of that acreage I was talking about to get down to 407. We're proposing a choice of use here. This would either be an extension of sub-area 1 or of sub-area 4. We think over time, the market's gonna tell us which direction that needs to go in. Once that choice would be made with the first plan that would be reviewed and approved by the city, we would be sort of stuck with the remainder of the project being that same use type, so we would mixed use with the employment center sorts of uses. But, you know, this could go either way. In terms of parkland and preservation of environmental amenities, you know, I think a lot of people think that developers are, you know, out there to destroy the environment and maybe don't have the environment at top of mind. I would say that, at least in our situation, we view those things as amenities. And, you know, so they provide great organizing and planning elements for a site. They bring value to a property. They make property, especially where people are gonna be living, a lot more enjoyable. So, you know, top of mind for us will be to make sure that we're paying particular attention to connectivity, a trail system that is robust and ultimately will provide for connections when the time comes to the center of town, which, you know, I mentioned last time, we all agree is something we want to be part of the equation to enhance as well. We believe it's a great amenity for the community. So as we come through with these final development plans, we'll be really getting into you know, a lot of detail on those things. I think we'll probably have a lot of discussion. We are I wanted to point out that your PD code has a requirement. I meant to look at the per residential unit square footage minimum of parkland that has to be either dedicated to the city or a fee in lieu paid. I think it's $45,000 or $47,000 an acre if you don't provide it on site. So start doing the math there. It's something like 10% of the site out of the chute would build out to the full capacity of residential would be dedicated as parkland, or a fee in lieu would be paid. Obviously, with other requirements such as maximum lot coverage ratios and just in a general sense, the need to have green space on every project mostly, you know, we're gonna have well more than that. So there's a distinction between parkland and privately owned open space. We're going to certainly meet or exceed those code requirements for the parkland, but we're also going to be providing privately owned open space that, enhances the look and feel of the community and will be maintained by private landowners. The last thing I wanted to touch on, and I appreciate your time here, are, building setbacks and lot requirements. We have basically taken what we have seen to work in other locations. Along major thoroughfares, we have minimum setbacks for buildings and pavement. I think along Green Chapel Road in particular, we have to recognize that, we've got this massive development across the street with very large buildings, and so, we want the ability to sort of, capture that and that scale if we need to. We think that's appropriate, and so you capture some of that scale by placing buildings maybe closer to the road right away than you would in other locations that are more rural in character. But we also think that having a streetscape that really looks nice and is inviting and is an entryway into the community is going to be important. We're going to have a lot of these elements, in particular with Green Chapel Road, already in place because the city of New Albany is constructing Green Chapel Road. And so that's going to kind of set the tone. I think you'll probably see white fence on the north side of Green Chapel Road. We think in other locations there's an ability for us to maybe create another identity for Johnstown that captures some of its history and its character. And so we look forward as we bring through plats and we bring through final development plans to try to kind of set the tone on what that could look like. But you can see here a lot of attention is paid to landscaping and mounding. Another example of a little bit taller mound, right here, this is I think a 6-foot mound as compared to a 3-foot tall mound, but you can see if you have an industrial development, for instance, on the other side of this mound, you can see the people there on the left-hand side of your screen, and really does provide good buffering and screening from public right-of-way when you do it properly. We've got requirements in here too for where we're up next to where residential uses are allowed or exist, that we're going to meet certain height and opacity requirements for mounding and landscaping to ensure that there's proper screening between uses that maybe are a little different, or a lot different from one another. This is an example of a streetscape and how this could look in a more industrial area. And we've got a couple other examples of that if it'll come up here. Very robust screening and mounding, and to the extent that we're next to residential uses or residentially zoned property, we will have evergreens as a part of the plantings because we recognize that during winter months, leaves fall, et cetera, so that's an important component there. But anyway, to wrap it all up, we've tried to look at every angle of this and address our neighbors in that respect, ensure that we're doing this in a way that is responsible for the school district, and we think there's a ton of opportunity here for the Johnstown community as a whole, not just the city, but its other partners, to really have a project that's going to be a game changer in terms of its future. So we thank you for listening, and we're ready for questions and answers once I think you have the public speaking. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Anything else from our applicant there? All right. So at this time, I'll go ahead and open up for public comment before we come back to our commissioners. All comment, please direct at our zoning commission. We'll keep you to 3 minutes. Teresa will help us out with that. And we will get through this. If you're here as a group, please elect a speaker informally and try to get your comments out through that individual. And we have slips. I know that some of you signed before the meeting. I'll have Teresa call those out. And I know some of you probably didn't sign in. We'll get to you guys after that. Again, keep all comments directed at the commission, and our applicant will keep track of those, and we'll have you answer at the end, just so we don't have so much back and forth in between. So, all right, Teresa, if you could come up with the slips.
First speaker slip I have is Todd Huston. Houston, sorry.
Todd Houston, resident of Johnstown City. So this is an opportunity for this city. It's an opportunity for this area. It's one that's not gonna go away. They say that the toothpaste is being squeezed out and we have to move forward, not putting it back in a tube. So as a zoning committee, and with this being annexed into the city of Johnstown, you folks have a say for once. It's we get to decide how the planning will take place. Not that if it will take place, but how it will take place. It's going to happen, but how it takes place and what takes place within that annexed area is in this chamber here. It's not down there in New Albany. And that's a huge, huge difference. I don't have a lot more to say on that part because, again, I guess I'm a person looking forward. It's going to happen. We have a say. The one thing I do want to bring up that is in regards to some of this area that's already within the city of Johnstown. And that's the sub-area 2. Now, this is where we get to say we get to do what we want to do in Johnstown, and we have a say. That area was originally zoned for light industrial and a little bit of something else that wasn't planned for what we have here, which was warehouse and distribution. Michelle Robertson in the last meeting explicitly said, you know, we were part of that zoning planning process, and the city of Johnstown didn't want warehouse and distribution in that area. I, as a resident, don't think it fits well there. It's a little bit too close to our city area for a lot of traffic, a lot of truck traffic that would be coming in that area. I don't know anything about Huntington Solution and what their proposed, what was presented up here. I just saw a couple buildings. If it's distribution and warehousing, then that was something that the Port Authority might have promised that I don't want to see. Okay? I really want our planning and zoning to stick to their guns in regards to what's going to be developed in there. I'm in favor of planned development. I think it's a lot like designing a house. You don't build a kitchen and come back a week later with another builder and build a family room, and a week later build a dining room upstairs. Planned development is really well positioned for large acre areas, which this is all being annexed into. So I'm a fan of planned development, and with that also comes much of the housing. But just to finish up here, I don't know what my time is, but again, I want to really see that sub-area 2 be thought out well. It's already part of our city, and to have it as warehousing and distribution, I don't think is a very good fit. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, we'll move on to our next speaker. Who's next on the slips?
Jeff Barr.
Thank you, Teresa. Jeff Barr, longtime resident here in Johnstown, 181 South Main Street. What I wanted to focus on in my 3 minutes here to this board is to really focus on, based on the numbers and what I know of the planned development, this would only allow about 14 acres of park space. As many of you know, with young children yourselves, we are at a critical need of needing large parcels of park space to develop for active recreation. A pocket park here that's a half an acre with a park bench or a small playground is not what we need. We need space for our children now, as well as the generations to come, as the presenters had talked about. And without that space, we're going to have a gap of employment, homes, a nice school system. But what's really second in there is parks and recreation. And we don't necessarily have that today. And if we don't plan for that, so they're getting the first bite of the apple of a planned development. If I'm not mistaken, the original Beavelheimer Park with New Albany Company dedicated 55 acres to Beavelheimer Park, which is now 110 acres, because they knew that they had a need when the community grew, which was much smaller than what Johnstown is today. So I think as this board hears the proposal that I would like to hear about, and I'm sure it's just a negotiating mechanism and tool as to getting 40 to 60 acres that's dedicated for park development, not spread out. If I did the math right, it's about 14 acres that would need to be parkland, and that's going to be spread out within the development of this site. But that does not allow for a child to play soccer or baseball or lacrosse is growing in the community, or any other space that needs a rectangular field space. So I encourage you that as you have these negotiations, this is just the one of many coming up, to keep that in your mind of where does that land come? Because the in lieu of fee is never going to get you enough. I think it's $15,000 per acre under the, if they don't develop it, they're paying $15,000. So if they're short 10 acres, they're going to pay $150,000. That might get you 1 acre around here nowadays. So we're very short on that. New Albany Land Company and Johnstown Land Company own a lot of land. They own that land. So for us to take in lieu of fees is never going to get us that 40-acre parcel. So I encourage you to use the negotiation tools of how this comes about to try to get something for the community for today and our future. Thank you for consideration of my thoughts.
Thank you. That was perfect at 3 minutes.
I can't stay quiet this long.
I can't stay quiet that long. If I could just jump in very quickly, the gentleman referenced a $15,000 fee in lieu. It in fact is $45,000 fee in lieu.
Even breaker.
And if Dad's gonna jump in, I'm gonna jump in as well. So the calculations, it's 1,500 square feet based on the number of units. So if you were to take 1,000 units, I'm just using simple math, 1,000 units times 1,500 acres.
Well, the 1,221 is 42 acres.
Correct.
So if you go by there, what's stated, it's 42 acres or 1.8 million, is what that math comes out to be.
And that's aside from, and I'll let the applicant speak on this, that's aside from the required green space that's also a requirement. This is specifically dedicated to that park area. So Dad jumped in, I jumped in, and now Jesse, and I'll pull back.
We'll try to, I really want to try to get the comments, and then we can come back to the questions. We have a lot of back and forth. We're a very vocal group, so we have a lot of back and forth when that happens. Okay. We will move on to our next speaker.
We have Philip Wagner with Johnstown Monroe Schools.
Perfect.
Hello, Philip Wagner, Johnstown Monroe Schools. I don't have a lot to offer tonight except talk about process and planning. The Board of Education has been working closely with city officials, John, elected officials, multiple times. We appreciate all the attention to this. Have met with New Albany Company and their representatives once. We're looking, to future meetings as well. I think what's important in this project for the school district is not only this specific project, but the die that's cast as we think about the future. The school district has long-range planning, as you would expect, but it's reviewing these potential developments and the impact upon the student enrollment and forecasting. Based on our current progress, we expect the school district to have an updated published plan by December that'll be contingent upon what occurs with this project. And in advance, with the school board members, I want to reinforce that the school board members universally do not want to have the community grow that large. Ideally, we'd like to have no more than one school district, no more than one high school, no more than one middle school, and that's long-range planning, so that's a goal if possible through this process. There's no desire on behalf of the school district to become like some other central Ohio communities where there are multiple high schools, multiple middle schools. In addition to in student enrollment considerations, this school district is looking at financial modeling. Again, some of that work is with the city. We're working closely with city officials on economic development, compensation model. That conversation of progress has been going very well, very detailed, of course, a lot of work, but very well. And potentially, we could have a council and school board joint meeting in October to vote on that compensation agreement. That, I don't want to monetize all this, but that financial impact is important because ultimately the school district and the Board of Education is exploring the financial modeling because they do not want to raise taxes through this growth process as well too. If possible, the ideal aspect would be that we could take some of the monies encumbered from these projects and be able to then use that money for building projects and not have to increase taxes. So that's the goal and objective. For example, our high school can have a 6 classroom addition. If we can fund that with some of these additional monies, that would be desirable again too. So I'll be here tonight to answer any questions, but again, appreciate all the participation and cooperation that we've had, and that's been going on for months, including the compensation agreement, and here to answer anything we can on behalf of the school district, so thank you.
Thanks, Dale.
So Dr. Wagner, I have a couple quick things. So the mechanism to safeguard your school from growing to a particular size is an agreement between all the municipalities and yours that are in your school district. Is that correct? There is a legal mechanism for that?
Well, somewhat. So that's why we talk about the die being cast with this project, because presently the school, well, I can say presently, the school district boundaries won't change unless, that's a very onerous, difficult process. We have 52 square miles. So obviously we have the city of Johnstown, which will be, there'll be annexation and grow. We have all of Monroe Township. We have a portion, about half of Liberty Township, and then we also have a third approximately of Jersey Township. So what we do here is going to cast the die for the future. Now, the model will be a little different with townships than it will be with the city, of course, but we're also working, in fact, we have a meeting, Sean sent me an invite again today. We'll do a second meeting with Monroe Township relatively soon here, and then we hope to work with the other townships.
Okay. And I know that you probably didn't come prepared for this, but maybe next meeting, if you could give us a little bit more of in detail report about what our capacity is now with proposed projects that we've already approved, and then what our capacity looks like with this proposal as far as so we have in mind of whether we're going to need what facilities, if any, we need immediately or within the 7 to 10 year build out period. I think that'll be important to coordinate that too. I wouldn't mind having just a general one for the zoning board.
Yeah, the last
maybe
January, I made a presentation to council. I can do this for this body as well, and just showed what our projections are, and that is in pre-Intel, so minus.
And we had that Concord project. I don't know if that was in there because that was another 120 houses that happened this last year, I think.
I met with city officials and when I was first started here, and we actually tried to model all of the building projects.
Yeah.
We're required by law to project out 5 years. It gets a little fuzzy when you get out further than that, but we did go out to 2030, and actually we're right now working on updating our plans to 2031. Yeah, I'm careful off the top of my head, but I can do some of this. The current high school, or the high school on its current path, will be a capacity about 2027. That's pre-Intel with these projects right now. So that's why I talk about we have the ability to add a 6 classroom addition on the high school, which is another 150 students.
And maybe we could just have, even if you just wanted to send us an email with the numbers on, I don't want to predict what's going to happen in the future, but I do want to know what's relevant to projects that are, physically here, like this project with 1,200 unit. What does that do? Just specifically this project, maybe even is kind of my.
That's critical, and there's 2 parts of that answer. Or in the answer, I say there's 2 parts. One is the staging and the timing of this, and 2 is how impactful are the volume. With the current project, and again, I know there's fair housing, and all, but we have asked those questions when we met with New Albany representatives. Based on the current model, about 60 to 70 students if they come in with the full 1,200. That's different then, Leafy Dell is going to have another
Okay.
development. So, right now, well, I should say, this is all going pre-Intel, I can tell you. The apartments for us generate about 1.2 students per apartment right now, and that's been our history, and about 0.8 of a student on houses. So, that's how we build our modeling.
It seems so much lower on this one, but I said I was gonna trust you, you're the expert. For this project to be created at like 0.06 students, it seems low,
Well,
but I'll
we-
take I said you're the expert.
Well, listen, I'll tell you, I'm very clear about this. The school district has a very neutral position on this. There is no advantage to the school district to grow. I mean, we're responsive to the needs of the community, but we don't have a target to say we want to be, twice as big as we are now or anything like that. I'm just telling you the information that we have from research, and then we've been pushing back, and we actually have more data coming to us from the New Albany company, because they talked and showed a model of Bridge Park and some other at Grandview Heights, and I believe that model too. We're looking at some of those. It's going to be the product, if you're talking about 600
Yeah.
some square feet.
I agree with their explanation. I follow it.
I think it's
So-
definitely important that we work with the school district going forward, as we have been, and you'll see council doing the same. Because it's definitely important to make sure we can digest all of this growth at an appropriate pace.
Thank you.
Because for the school district, we look at everything, it's all the services, right? I mean, we're talking about roads, first responders, schools and all too, but we're getting our data updated, and we've been some collaborative meetings, so we'll do more of that. So, but I'm here tonight if there's anything else I can help.
Thank you. Okay, our next speaker, please.
Molly Gammersfelder.
Hi, I'm Molly Gammertsfelder, and I live in the Johnstown area. And there's just a couple of things that I wanted to point out. I mean, I've lived here for 24 years. I've been in council chambers a lot as we discuss different things. And I just wanted to point out, in the past, I've seen this council room packed with people that wanted to make comments about whatever the issue was. And I always felt like Johnstown Council always worked with the public. We had some really rewarding results from dealing with things like development and things that happened in Johnstown, where we really felt like Johnstown Council listened to the public and tried to work with the public as to how Johnstown would grow. I just wanted to say that I feel as I said, I've lived here a long time. I know a lot of people in Johnstown, Newark, Alexandria, Sunbury, Heath. I can say that from my objective, my perspective, 98% of the people that I know are not happy about what's happening here. The individual there mentioned the white fence. That's a very sore point in Johnstown. We're Johnstown, we're not New Albany. If we're going to grow, we want to grow and be an individual. We want Johnstown to be a cool town, a cool place to live, not just a sprawling conglomerate of businesses, restaurants, what have you. Not that we can't have some, but the general perspective is, oh God, it's just going to be a mess. And so that's why, we're hoping that you guys will make some serious efforts. Please try to keep Johnstown. As far as Parkland, I'm glad to hear people say that about Parkland. Parkland is important. But green space is important for the wildlife. And I know, again, there's a huge concern, growing concern, about what's going to happen to the wildlife. I mean, if you live in the rural areas, you see what's happening with the wildlife. They don't have anywhere to go. The little puny amount of green space the New Albany company is talking about is not enough green space for the wildlife. And lastly, jobs, I am an employer. I've been an employer for the past 25 years. I don't understand what the big deal is about jobs. I mean, if you look around at the businesses in Johnstown, Newark, Alexandria, Sunbury, how many help wanted signs do you see? There's plenty of jobs. We don't need more jobs. We don't need more restaurants. We don't need more shops. I mean, there's shops, restaurants, all kinds of businesses that are having to cut hours and close down because they have staffing issues. So, I mean, that's just a mystery to me why that's such a big deal, because I don't see it. I mean, I just wanted to voice those opinions because, you know, like I said, I think if you guys make more of an effort, I know you do make an effort to try to make these meetings public, but I think it's important to let the public know that you will listen.
We definitely appreciate your sentiments, and we appreciate you coming tonight. We definitely want to hear the public, and we've gone out of our way on a number of things to try to make sure, putting things on Facebook, getting things out, doing the YouTube videos, things like that. Tonight you'll be on the nightly news, but so I think we definitely want to make sure that this gets out to the public. And as you see us around town, I think that anyone involved would be happy to talk to you.
Okay, great.
We
All right.
appreciate the suggestions and criticisms of the plan. And the more specific you can be with what aspects of the plan that you don't like, the more helpful it is for us in our negotiations with the applicant to try to come up with a plan that either works for both the town happy and them happy, or it doesn't, you know, or because that's how I view our role is, you know, we're here negotiating for the town to try to come up with a plan that's mutually beneficial, or so we either get to that point or we don't. But, you know, that's where we want to support you guys and voice those positions. If we get some, the more specific, the better, so.
Yeah, and you know, I mean, everybody has concerns about the traffic, and, you know, I have several friends that live down there where Intel is, and I know there was so much unhappiness because in the very beginning, you know, Intel made a big, you know, public statement saying, well, if you have any comments, questions,
Right.
problems, you know, come to us, and then, you know, they go. I mean, fortunately, I don't live down there, thank God, but I mean, nothing happens. I mean, there's always constant complaining about the trucks flying through there, and they've tried to blame the New Albany Company and to Intel, and the buck just keeps getting passed.
Right. We definitely appreciate you coming in tonight. Anytime that you'd like to come in and speak, we definitely welcome you to. And any emails you'd like to send. And if you're outside of the city limits, I know a number of people come in from the township, and we'd always welcome that feedback as well. But you have great trustees that are also there to help if you have any questions.
Okay, my 3 minutes is up, huh?
Thank you. All right.
I don't have any more slips. I don't know if there's.
Okay, we will go to the rapid fire portion. Are there any other public comment on this? And if you'd raise your hand, we'll call you out one by one, sir.
I have a question.
If you'd please come to the podium and state your name and.
My name is Will Koppel with the, I'm 70 North Main. With all these new people, is there a dedicated medical area in any of this? I know New Albany and then the city of Columbus next to New Albany, there are a number of Wexner centers, and Ohio Health has a freestanding emergency room, and so it's a good haul to a real emergency room from here. And I'm old, so.
I definitely appreciate that, and I could understand as a new resident how you'd ask that question. You got to find those places when you come in. I think we'll get a little more specific on that here later on. We'll definitely get you that answer though. Other questions from the public?
Can I make a comment?
Yes, please, if you'd like to come up. And we just need your name. We don't need an address.
Well, you're gonna love it, because it's Menno Van Scoik, but most people call me Mrs. Van. And I've lived in the area about 29 years. Both my daughters graduated from Northridge, and I moved here from Dublin because I wanted to get away from the city. And we've really appreciated the wildlife, enjoying the night sky. And I tried to fire up more people to come to the meeting tonight, because if we don't speak up, then how are you ever gonna know what our wishes are? But I think a lot of people felt like they got, you know, we heard about Intel, and it was too late. Not that we could have stopped it, but it was like a done deal. So the things that are important to me, because I work in the field, but I'm gonna reiterate some of what Molly said and what Jeff said about park space. For me, it's about, I care about wildlife and wildlife habitat, and keeping that feel. To me, sub-area 3 and 4, you know, the pictures and also Bridge Park, Grandview Yard, Jeffrey Park have no appeal to me and a lot of the people out here. If I wanted that type of living, I would live there. So I'm gonna try to fire up some people to come to the September 27th meeting and let our voices be heard about, intel's coming, change is coming, but like Molly said, we want a say on what Johnstown is gonna look like. So I thank you for your time, and I'll try to get some people fired up here on social media and whatnot and let our voices be heard. I know a lot of people are saying, what difference does it make? It's a done deal. No, that we can't have that attitude. We may not always win and get what we want, but we have to have our voices heard. So I appreciate you guys making it time available to us. And I was going to say, I think you're going to be surprised by what you hear, but I think you already know what a lot of people that live in the Johnstown area, and those of us that have lived out here for a while, what we want. And I'm sorry to say, and I don't want to be insulting, but this is not what I would like to see Johnstown. Okay, thank you for your time.
Thank you. We appreciate you, and anyone else that wants to stop by. It's great to hear from everybody, because we have a lot of meetings where we don't hear anybody's opinion, and sometimes you wonder if you did the right thing. But
Just a
Teresa.
quick comment, because it's relevant to your comment. The public meeting was originally stated that it was 6:30. It was scheduled for 6 o'clock.
Okay.
Thank you.
6, okay.
Unless
Thank you,
something
Teresa.
changes, but I'm waiting for some material.
Okay.
Sounds good. 6 o'clock.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right. Further public comment. Troy, if you'd like to come up.
Hi, my name is Troy Hendren. I'm one of the township trustees here in Monroe Township, which is going to encompass the new development and so forth. And we've been having a lot of meetings with the village of Johnstown, the county and everything. And one thing that the developers, the New Albany Company, who have been very good at communicating, in my opinion, with us and so forth, is when you become a resident or an owner of a building or a development in Johnstown, you're not just in the Intel area. You're not just on Miller Road, you're on Miller Church Road, you're on Concord Road, you're on Harmony Church Road, and so forth like that. So some of the things that this area needs, and we need to hold people coming to us that there's more than just your development. When I was talking to Mr. Wagner last meeting we had, we need a lot of things, and not necessarily, we don't need to take up the area over here where you're at. So we need places for some elementary schools. He gave me a whole list, I can't remember them all. In future, we gotta look 25, 30 years down the road. And one thing maybe we haven't done good at is asking, and I know most of the farmers, my family's one of them, and we're asking for areas for schools. We need a place, we need like 3 acres for EMS. We're not asking for a lot. Right now, we're working on trying to get a pickleball court together, trying to scrape together $10,000. In the meantime, we were in New Albany, it's like, well, you know, so we just need some things that not necessarily you don't have available in your area, but we need to ask for things outside our area and so forth. We have some park area that we're working on and so forth. It's not over by Intel and so forth, and that may not be the best place for parks. You know, but we have to let, if you come in here, you're not just over there, you're all in. And as far as the school system goes and so forth, we gotta look down the road. We do need some land, and maybe you could help us out with a couple of these smaller things. Go back to your bosses, and they have been good to us. I will say that as far as communicating, but now it's where the rubber hits the road. We need some of these things, and we need to almost demand them when they come in here to do, people come here to do things, to do some of these things, because we've done a lot of things in this town that's come without big industry. Local people, local business that built schools, auditoriums, stadiums, and so forth. We've done pretty good without having to go to, we've never had an Anheuser-Busch or Limited or anything like that. So if you can, help us out the best you can, but I think we need to go in there and say, you want this? You know, this is a desirable place to live. We got something everybody wants. So there's nothing wrong with asking for it. Thanks a lot.
All right, thank you. All right, further public comment. All right, in the back.
My name is Linda Peck. I live here in Johnstown. I have heard a lot of people's opinions. Of course, you see it on Facebook all the time. I decided to start attending some of these meetings to find out what's going to happen in our hometown. And our hometown is Johnstown, it's not New Albany. And I heard a lot of representation here from New Albany Company. I saw a picture of Leafy Dell. This is not what we want. We want more like this. So we saw the pictures of the places in Columbus, Dublin, and other places. And so I implore you, because you have the power in your hands, obviously, to approve or deny all of this. I mean, what they're proposing, part of it is in the city of Johnstown. And like I said, we're not New Albany, we're Johnstown. So the majority, I agree with the other lady, 98% of the people I've talked to are not in favor of Intel coming to begin with, but it's coming, so we have to deal with it. We don't have to accommodate New Albany and Intel employees. Because I heard a lot of we want in that demonstration. Well, what we want, what about what Johnstown residents want? You guys represent Johnstown, not New Albany. So I implore you to consider that. Hopefully there'll be more public interest, more public comments at the next meeting. But it seems like we're being railroaded. And New Albany wants to work its way in to our city limits. I mean, they're already taking out everything around us. So I implore you to please consider what Johnstown residents want, not what New Albany Company wants. So, thank you.
Thank you. All right, other public comment before we open up to our zoning commission. All right, go ahead, sir.
My name's Dave Ward. I live close to Johnstown here, in your school district anyway. I guess I have worked myself up to at least say something here. I got two extremes that I just want to get out from my chest. First off, plan's great. You know, I think that's super. While I read the plan, you talked about, you know, trying to maintain the homeliness of the downtown area and Johnstown, how it feels, but nowhere did I actually see the people. And what I mean by that is, it's been my experience and fortune to move around the country a little bit. And when I see areas that have rapid growth, usually they're out west and ski resorts, not that I ski, but the residents actually get moved out of the town because they can't afford to live there. And what I see here, being a retired person, is, you know, I just got my new tax assessment for the last 3 years that went up 28%. In the last meeting I was in with the council, they talked about a new school tax levy going on at 4 times, more than 4 times of the previous one. And now the growth that somebody needs to pay for, and I'm really concerned of your actual constituents that live here. Some of them, I think one of your documents said that their average income is $18 an hour. That's very problematic to me, is I don't think your residents may be able to afford to stay. So that's one extreme. The other one is completely off the wall, but since I have worked for Homeland Security, would like to at least understand on a national defense level, since we have a strategic chip company coming into our area, is there anything being developed or enhanced or added to kind of monitor what's going on in our general region? I mean, you got data centers, which I know a lot about data centers since I managed some big ones. You always want to be very, very focused on where your data centers are and your redundancy and backups and all that good stuff. But when a chip factory comes in, if you just listen to the news, you know, one of the things in Thailand is chips that China wants. That's an easy target. I've lived close to nuclear reactors. I definitely always want to be on the west side of them. Just so happens, I'm downwind of this. So that's all I want to say is I don't know whether you're the right counsel or the right people to listen to that, but I would really like for you to take it serious on both extremes. The residents, can they afford to stay? And gosh, is any additional planning from a national defense standpoint being considered? That's
All right, thank you. All right, further public comment? All right, I want to thank you all for getting up to speak. I know that it's tough sometimes to get up there, and I've been on the other side of that podium as well, so I appreciate you getting up there and speaking. And we definitely will weigh your decisions. I do want to give our applicant a chance to answer questions that were asked before we do open up to our commissioners, and then we will follow up.
Thank you very much, Mr. Green. I don't have too much to add. I think that I want to reiterate on the parkland and open space. You know, the code does have requirements for dedication of parkland. Fee in lieu wouldn't be something that we could just say, hey, we don't want to provide the parkland, we're just going to pay you. It's a decision, I believe it's a city council function to, we would have to demonstrate as a part of a request that it would be better for some reason to accommodate the parkland in another location. Maybe the city has an opportunity that they can acquire some land and it can use that money to do that. So it wouldn't be a situation where we just, as an applicant, come in and write a check and forgo our obligation to provide parkland within the site. It'd have to be a council-approved decision. We believe the parkland is an organizing element for a lot of what we're doing, especially on the mixed-use side. And it's an important component to us as well, and I think we've got a track record of creating some really good spaces that are open to the community, and we hope to do the same here. By no means, when I mentioned a white fence, did I mean to indicate that we were trying to make this New Albany 2. What I did mean was that there's some things we can't control. Green Chapel Road is going to be built to a specification that the city of New Albany has already approved and it's being built, but in other areas, other roadways, other perimeters of this site, I think we have a real opportunity working together to create an identity that is distinctly Johnstown. And so with the exception of Green Chapel there, where some of those things are out of our control, that's what we intend to do. You know, I'm mindful of the fact that tax bills are rising. I think that's happening everywhere throughout central Ohio. The flip side of the coin of our people getting priced out is purely supply and demand economics 101. You provide more housing, there's more housing opportunities, and if there's more housing opportunities, hopefully, now those are different housing opportunities than maybe we've seen here, but maybe that helps to moderate the price fluctuations, and so by providing additional supply, maybe prices go down a little bit, just a theory. So with that, I've talked enough this evening. I'm happy to hear from you guys.
Thank you. Other questions?
I want to make a point about this while we're talking about parkland a little bit too. My reading of this, the plan doesn't clearly differentiate the difference between parkland and green space. So I feel like our code It says green space shall be established and evaluated separately from parkland requirements. So I think we should be looking at those very separately. So I don't think we should be looking at a green space with a path through it, and a piece of next to a warehouse as parkland. So as we go through the different districts and stuff, I think that's important to remember. Maybe parkland isn't appropriate in all the sub areas. We can go through that. And then generally, I think the sentiment that I'm hearing from the crowd is that we hope that you guys give us the acreage and not the money. So.
We're more than willing to do that, and, yeah, and so, if that's the pleasure of the decision makers, that's
Yeah.
what we will effect do.
And my understanding is it doesn't have to be in this contiguous to your other properties. It can be anywhere in Johnstown jurisdiction. Is that correct, Sean?
I believe, and Thad will have to chime in if I go sideways here a little bit, but I believe for the parkland dedication, it would be specific to that area. But if there was a payment in lieu of, which as Thad pointed out is $45,000 per acre to the net of the 42, that could be utilized by the city. That would then go into the city, and then the city could potentially purchase parkland in other areas. That's the whole concept of the payment in lieu of. It's so that those monies can be utilized to preserve parkland elsewhere. I've said this in some of our meetings, and I'll bring it up again, but I do want to hesitate because this may not be how things roll out. Those are opportunities, and I think Troy mentioned when you ask for the want of land that may be necessary for, EMS facilities, 3 acres, and then also with obviously the need for potentially additional schools. And those are going to be things that we're going to model from a land use modeling as much as we can in the comprehensive plan. And I'll plug that again shamelessly. That entirety, that larger picture is that comprehensive planning look, but I also want to put a little special tag on that. Johnstown is limited to the effective school district because we can only control what's inside of our city borders. What happens in Jersey Township, we don't have a control over. What happens in Liberty Township, what happens in Monroe. And that's why it's really critical, and we've been really successful over the last couple months, and I would say year, to make these partnerships, and invited those participants to be a part of our comprehensive plan. We did something that's maybe not normal, and we did a comprehensive planning area that's over the entire school district, instead of just kind of within a normal planning area. So we're kind of taking the heavy lifting, maybe, away from the townships that don't necessarily have those resources, and saddling that on our back. But as a leader in the community, as Johnstown, I think everybody revolves around us, and we feel privileged to be able to do so. And hopefully we can all work together to define some of those levels that the school wants to have, but then also the parkland, the EMS for the townships. So it's a collective.
Is there portions of our code that set aside land for new schools? I know there's not in the PUD code, but is in the other, there isn't?
No other place in our old code. And that was one of the reasons we needed to get a PD district in place, because of some of the deficiencies that we realized were in our old code. I know this board has tried tremendously over the last couple of years to make some progress there, and it's commendable. Nobody really realized or knew what was coming, so we're fast tracking things as best we can. And like I said, I think we're running out in front of it, but just maybe barely. It's nipping at our heels, but we've got some good partnerships in place that are hopefully going to bear some pretty good fruit.
There is a piece in the newer code, this is probably what you're thinking of, the most recent version
That
of
didn't
the
make it.
proposed code, where it was parkland in lieu of, but there was also a provision for school impact that was specific to support
Okay.
the school from a land perspective.
And that was in one of the drafts.
That was in one of the
It was in the
drafts.
draft.
Great. Sounds like
been
we're
a year on
modeling
that.
some of what you all have drafted and utilizing that with the PD code. And those are some things that, as we start to work through MKSK, updating the comprehensive plan and updating other areas of the code, it'll be really, really relevant for conversations. Everybody wants to know what we're going to be when we grow up, and that planning process happens today, right now. If we sit back, we're going to be letting the development manage us rather than us manage the development, so.
And I wanted to make one more response to you got to some of the public comments too, just to give you guys a little bit of perspective on our decision-making process and development, that we control what's in Johnstown, but Johnstown School District is so much larger than the Johnstown borders that when you say that we don't like this project, go take a hike, that doesn't mean that they're not going to still build this project in our school district. They may just annex it to New Albany and have their project giving these revenues on the same property, but the revenues going to New Albany and the kids in our schools. So it's more complicated than just being able to say take a hike, because and I hate to have them hold a gun to our head and say we have to take it because you're in, we're in your school district. But so I think it's important for us to try to come up with a plan that works for everybody. Like Dr. Koppel said, there's not a hospital close by, and that's something that we may be able to work into this plan that's going to be a benefit to the whole community. So you might not like the apartments aspect of it, and not everybody's going to like every aspect of it. If we can come to an agreement through this negotiation process that works for us, and it's just not a yes or no. With our decision doesn't make it stay or go away is basically what I want to try to say. So have a little bit of sympathy for our position.
Right, to echo what Jesse said, this is not your typical annexation and build-out process. It's not what you typically get, because you get something that's out in a different area. It comes in, it's part of a real estate deal. If zoning turns it down, it may go away. That's not the case here. There's property that is owned, and it is owned by an entity. And if you turn the project down, it is still owned by that entity. Looking to build a project that is squarely in the middle of one of the hottest economic zones in Ohio history, if not our country's history. So it's interesting we get to be part of this process, but there's going to be a lot to come with this project. There's definitely a lot to examine. Even though we have this project coming in and it is something that we are going to have to work with, that doesn't mean that we lose our identity in the process. And I think you're going to see this board come through with that. We have been very vocal, as in the last meeting, that we don't lose our identity in this. We have talked about architecture. We've talked about different things. We've talked about tying it in. I think the pillars that were mentioned on there with roads and other aspects, we want to make sure it's not an island out there. So I think that's something. Obviously, our schools have to be able to digest it, and we've worked hard with the schools. We'll continue to work hard with the schools to make sure, because if we get a project that doesn't complement our education system, then we were right where what Jesse was talking about. There are other entities that will develop that property if we don't, and they may or may not, you won't know till the end, have our best interests at heart. And there will be a lot of missed opportunities that we miss out on that you may lament later on and not realize it. So there are a lot of things here that we have to examine to make sure that we get a product that we can be happy with. But I do want to make sure that we have all of our public's questions answered. So going down through there, I do know.
Question, Ryan.
Yes, go ahead.
Can you or somebody else talk a little bit, that 100,000-foot view on the new community authority and the 9.75 mils that they are putting on themselves? Talk a little bit about what that means in the sense of revenue and how that money is spent, who controls that money. Could somebody talk a little bit about that?
That'll be a key part of this after a lot of the annexation and build out happens, and I can have our staff touch on that briefly. That'll be something to capture the revenues there.
I can touch on it, but I'm actually, since it's the applicant that is the one that brought it up and has offered to kind of lead us through this process, or at least provide information, and Aaron has been familiar with it, and I don't want to speak out of turn whenever I'm describing something that I view is the applicable number at 9.75 or 10.5 or whatever the case may be. So I'll defer to the applicant to bring forth what they had in mind for the new community authority that you had experience with in other communities, and it's been pretty successful. There's a lot to unpack, but I think Aaron's probably going to be able to speak to it a little bit more specific for this piece of property.
All right, yep.
Thank you, Sean. Appreciate the question. So where I have seen this work is in areas where there are big infrastructure needs. And so what we're proposing is a voluntary perpetual 9.75 mil community authority assessment charge. That's an annual charge that essentially is added to the real estate tax bill for the properties within this district. It would not go away if there were an abatement granted to a major economic development project. And we found that the market has been okay with that. 9.75 mils is a bit of a magic number. It's like, buying something at the store for $9.99 instead of $10.50, right? Feel a little better about it. So it's a little bit of a marketing tool too. But it does, essentially what happens is if you pick an amount of value for a piece of land as it's improved, and your tax bill, everybody's real estate tax bill reads the same way and is calculated the same way. 35% of the appraised value is the assessed value, and then you multiply that times the millage rate that is the conglomeration of all the different agencies in the school district who get their money. In this case, you would multiply that 35% result by 0.00975. And that's the annual assessment. So pick your number. If there's $100 million worth of improvements, which is not difficult to do with some of these projects we're talking about, it's a pretty significant amount of money. It's voluntary in the sense that a property owner has to record a document against their property that compels them and all future owners to pay that charge. So once it's in place, it never goes away unless that new community authority is dissolved. The board is appointed under state law. The majority of the seats are appointed by the municipality that created the new community authority. And then typically, one or all of the remainder of the seats, which are a minority of the board, are either developer representatives or others that the parties agree upon. But the city always has control of the board and their appointments. So, and I mean that in the sense of the city can't tell the board necessarily what to do, but if the organizing documents are drafted properly to make sure that the funds are used to benefit the city, you hope that your representatives, first of all, they're gonna have a legal obligation to do that if it's written right, but you also hope that they're going to fulfill the policy goals of the city when they set the thing up. So I think that gives an overview. It's not a difficult thing to set up, especially if you have a willing developer do it. And, from our perspective, we would want other developers in your community to have to join it as well. And, there are ways that you can compel that to happen. From our perspective, selfishly, it's because we don't want to be at a competitive disadvantage when we have a project looking to do something down the street versus on our piece of property. We don't want to be at a disadvantage because you've got this millage charge here, but not over there. So it makes sense from both parties' perspective, from the private and the public side.
So who holds that money, and what are some, again, big picture, some examples of what that money is spent towards?
Can
Yes.
Can I jump in real quick, because I don't want you to get out of budget skis on some of that. The control of the money, that's essentially a function of that board. But two things I wanted to point out. Going forward with annexation, these are typically a requirement through annexation that is more of a conversation then. This happens to be all in conjunction because of the preliminary plan is tied to the annexation. So Johnstown moving forward will most probably, unless council tells me a different way, have this new community authority assessment on it with all new development. And some of that process is embedded because you don't want to necessarily negatively impact the residents that are currently here. So you can utilize those funds, and this is where I want to state before you get out with all the fun stuff. I'm the Debbie Downer of the group. A lot of the times there's a tremendous amount of infrastructure cost that go into developments that exist, and a misconception is that the older residents that have lived here for a while because of this new development are then going to have to bear the burden and the cost to service this area with new roads, water sewer lines, police protection, plowing and all of that. A lot of the times this NCA money can be utilized specifically from an infrastructure standpoint. Those operational things, you would hope that the income tax generated off of the residents that live there or the businesses that are located there would be sustaining for the operational. So I want to point that out because NCAs have been utilized in other areas. I think those types of things can happen, and Aaron's going to speak a little bit about the fun stuff that can get there, but we have an obligation to make sure that our current residents don't bear any of that infrastructure cost, and so some of those NCAs will be utilized for that, and that helps, to Jesse's point, control Johnstown's borders and boundaries. So if we can take control of our own fate and get in the driver's seat of our destiny, those are going to take some funds in order to do that. But once those things are paid off, then we can go into what Aaron's going to tell you about.
Well, I would agree that really the intent behind the new community authority charge and having a governing board is to direct those funds toward public infrastructure projects, which has a definition under the Ohio Revised Code, which can be anything from water and sewer to roads to public work facility, things like that. It does not go to the general funds of the city, cannot be used for its general operations, to plow snow or anything like that. So there's the state law has this wide net of improvements that are public in nature that can be funded or you can reimburse for, but it does not allow, and you can make that more restrictive and as specific as you want in the documents that create them. You can't go more expansive to more than the law would allow, but it does not allow for it to be used to operate a city or any other government. The magic really with the new community authority is not sitting there and waiting for the money to come in necessarily. It's that you can leverage that, just like we go buy a home, we get a mortgage and we put our 20% down. Nothing in life is, for sure, but death and taxes. It's part of the tax bill, so at some point we can have a critical mass of development that is come out of the ground. A bond issuer or a lender will look at that and say, hey, this is about as certain as it gets. We know you can make these debt service payments to support a $20 million road project or something like that. And so the magic is really when these things start generating enough revenue to where you can start leveraging it for much bigger amounts of money and you get pretty good interest rates because there's not a lot of risk for the lender.
And the fun parts that you were supposed to mention, but you didn't.
That was fun for me.
It was fun for you. Some of the examples.
Some of the projects that they've done in Central Ohio.
Absolutely.
You get things like parks, roads, bridges, all that, splash pads. That's for me more than anybody, but I think at this point. But, other communities have used that for hospitals. I think you had, Grove City used that for a hospital?
Grove City may have. I know specifically New Albany utilized some of those funds for a school project. They also did it for a fire truck. So I think the needs are different in different areas. You have to take a snapshot in time of what specifically is the need for that particular 15-year range and then identify those needs. And that's something that the board, once you form it, takes under consideration and says, what's these needs that exist right now that are going to be most beneficial to the community and are going to have the biggest impact to move the community in the goals and the directions that they want. And it varies. It could be a hospital situation, as Ryan mentioned, in Grove City. It could be a park. It could be a school system. It could be a fire truck. It could just be, I think City of New Albany's used it somewhat for their Market Street district to provide some things down there. So there's a lot of opportunities there, but that board is tasked with identifying, like I said, the snapshot in time of what those specific needs are and getting those done and then moving on to the next fun projects. So.
Those are more fun.
They are a lot more fun. I'm looking at water lines, sewer lines, and roadway structures that obviously are going to be important for Johnstown to do if they want to do any type of development. That the residents that are currently here would not be saddled with some of those things.
So in the end, that board controls 100% of that money as it comes in, as this is not going to happen in a year, but probably a 8 to 12 year period. That board is is the appropriator of those funds.
So we haven't formed our organizing documents yet, or that's in the works?
It's in the works.
I knew this question was gonna come up, and I'm gonna defer to Thad, because he's getting his microphone heated up, and we talked about this earlier, so go ahead, Thad.
Yeah, sure. So one of the things with the new community authority is that they have pretty broad measure of powers to collect these community development charges, which is the legal term for the millage rate that would be applied to the property in the new community authority, and to spend those funds under the statute. But they are able to be tailored through their organizing documents and through agreement with the city in terms of, you know, perhaps they would be limited in the expenditures they could make, or perhaps they would be contractually obligated through development agreement with the city to expend those funds in certain ways. So it is combined with the majority of the board comprising people who are appointed by the city. There are also contractual documents and their individual organizing documents that spell out a plan for how those community development charges will ultimately be spent and the
So
priority in which they will be
hypothetically,
spent.
Through this board, then through the city, that document can say it must be spent on X. It can't expand past the ORC of what the law allows, but it could, the city and the developer could put the documents and the language in there to be specific, to say restricted, it could only be to build schools, hypothetically.
Or you could say, I think you could say in the organizing document that you want to use XYZ amount to build a school, all right? Like you can put specific things in the organizing documents, right?
You can be specific in the organizing documents.
But you paint yourself into a corner.
Right, yeah, I mean, you want to be,
Yeah, I got some flexibility, I'm just saying hypothetically.
yeah, just as a
We'll definitely have some more,
So
we'll definitely
you're,
have some
so
more meetings.
the
and conversations
landowners
on this.
inside the PUD make up the other portion of the board, your representation gets watered down if another development comes in, another PUD comes in? Or, because the city always has a majority, right?
The city always has majority.
We'd have one
So if-
NCA.
Right
for
now, they're
city.
the only PUD, the only ones subject to have a burden on their property right now. So they're, let's just say 40% of the board, but say we have another PUD comes in next year, and they're gonna have to join the same community authority. The city still has their majority plus one, so in essence, their representation on the board would be watered down. Is that correct understanding?
well, I think it's too early to speak to what their representation on the board would be. I'd simply.
We still have to organize the
as I
board.
sit here.
Yeah, I think there's some flexibility in how that would work.
Okay, yeah,
The
I don't wanna
city
get into the weeds on
appointees
this
are
too bad,
always
because
majority.
we'll see, it's complex.
We will
legal
definitely
stuff.
have more information and things to come on that, and we'd be happy to share those with you.
One point I wanted to make is that your agreement to record the burden on your property would coincide with our approval and annexation, correct? Like that would all happen at once?
Yes.
I wouldn't be approving an annexation before that gets,
Well,
we have a
I think
recorded
we-
burden.
I think we'd have to, you'd want the legislation, ultimately council's legislation to condition the approval on either A,
That would
we
be
can't
one.
get a permit until either A, we join
Okay.
an existing one, or there is one form that we join. And I, from my end, I'd want it to say, provided it doesn't charge any more than, I'm saying 9.75 mils.
So we make it a condition, okay, I got you. I was just wanted to get that straight in my head about where that falls in the process. That makes sense, so thank you.
But to answer Mr. Barr's question, we wanted to make sure that we got a little clarification on that for you. I hope that gave you some. I hope that gave you some. It's still an organizational process, but we will get you more as we go.
Kind of led us down a rabbit hole of how that works and who controls what and how it all comes together. You know, when we talk about our transparency in our community and how that gets there, that's for us to also.
Yeah.
That'll be a meeting, good council meeting to come to.
This is the
when
magic of a
when
zoning
that
meeting or
organizing
committee
doc's up.
meeting. We get to flesh things out a little bit. Sometimes we go down a rabbit hole, but we keep it concise.
Thank
So,
you for taking my question.
thank you.
Chairperson.
Other questions that we had in here, I know there was a question about a medical center. We have that option in here. I don't know if there's any specific site plan for that yet.
No, but I'll say this, I think as these things occur in the area and within this development, that there's probably an opportunity for that to happen. We are allowing that in sub-area 1, for instance, which is a pretty large area. It would seem to lend itself a larger use like that next to, some of the other larger uses we're proposing. We would also be allowed to do it under certain circumstances in sub-area 4, but definitely we have that as being permitted in a good amount of area within the project.
All right, further questions? I think everybody's kind of had their questions answered at this point. Now, I know that our commissioners have a lot of questions, so I'd like to get to those. Kind of play point guard on that a little bit. Jesse's had quite a chance to speak tonight, so I want to hear Ben's thoughts on this. Now, as we go through this tonight, I kind of want to keep this a little higher level because we are down a couple members. We want to try to be more organizational, hit the high points of this, and then I expect the next meeting, we will probably send through our staff, we will send some tighter questions on this. We get down to the grammar on these things sometimes, but, so we.
I agree. I hope you do that, then in advance we can get it, so we're very prepared for
Right.
the next meeting. That would be excellent.
Right, okay. Ben, I will let you start with your thoughts.
Yeah, so it's a large document, and there's a lot that goes into it. I've gotten through it once. I'll read through it at least one more time. But just for transparency, what I'm using to balance this against, with respect to the guiding principles document that we have, the growth framework, the comprehensive plan, active transportation plan, our current code, Western Licking County Accord, and then obviously public feedback. So those are the variety of pieces that I'm using. The first question that I have is on page 11 of the document, and it has to do with density. So my curiosity is around the logic of the formula being used to determine the right to build number of homes. Now, I understand the 3 units per acre. My curiosity is around utilizing the entire 407 acres within the proposed district to determine what the density is.
So, very good question. So we put a lot of thought into this, and our general point of view was if who knows what the world would be like if we didn't have Intel here, but if this were all developed, we know even before this that there's a residential development pressure in Johnstown, and if you took the whole thing at 1 unit an acre, what would that yield? It's an easy math problem, right? We also then recognize, though, that there are consequences. They could be good or they could be bad, depending on your view of just single-family homes. And so we see the need, especially with this young professional market, to provide the multifamily. And we looked at your code, and I think today in your multifamily zoning district, there's a maximum of 5 units an acre. So we split it down the middle, and understanding in order to make these mixed unit components work, you have to have a critical mass of the residents to be there sort of after hours, after working hours. And so we sort of got to the number that way, that it was the middle ground between the two extremes, if you want to put it that way, under what would be an expectation and a code requirement. But also recognizing we have to have enough units to support these other uses after hours.
Understood. In thinking about it and comparing it to page 38, the Western Licking County Accord, utilizing that approach with the entirety of the acreage and then having residences just in one side feels like a conservation type of approach, right? But in this instance, you're then utilizing the balance of the open space, which the conservation type approach wants to achieve, and then kind of double counting that acreage again for further development with warehousing, distribution, etc. So that's where it feels a little off to me. Just feels weird. So I'll put that out there and keep it high level. The other piece with respect to the density, talking about the school district, I think it came up in a couple different places, young professionals being the target, limiting the number of individuals per bedroom, feels like it may be setting up for a transient type population when the two people in that particular development expand and then have to move. So that was interesting to me.
It really depends on what, we are trying to make commitments that will deliver, like I said, it's a few times here tonight, that will deliver what we're going to do tonight. We're open to however we get there. We're not looking to get people to move in and move out quickly either. It's trying to touch all the bases in terms of what's important to the community, to the school district, to the city. And so we're not the only people with good ideas, but we have to work within the bounds of the law. And, we thought that, this was an avenue we could kind of stroll down a little bit and see if it's a way to make sure that, by limiting the number of occupants per bedroom, that we're giving you a community that's going to be consistent with, the young professional, what the young professional wants.
Okay. The other piece to that, and I've only got a handful of these, so I won't be. on that.
Let them go. We got time.
So with that piece and trying to put together a proposal of school impact relative to number of students, how are you going to have a relative, a valid proposal with a unit bank type of approach when you're moving units between sub areas based off of demand as you're phasing this in? How are we going to be able to understand what your number is from a student effect?
I agree with the same thing. If you could explain that bank to us a little bit more and to the public, because I have a problem with how we're going to be able to digest and manage that.
I just don't know how you can get to a number if you're trying to be
Well, and
flexible with the housing unit, which I understand.
Right.
But if that unit may change, it'll affect the number that you're using to.
And who
propose.
polices things as they change is another question that I have.
Well, so the guardrails, I think, are a commitment in the zoning text to the number of bedrooms. I think the numbers will bear out that a 1 to 2 bedroom apartment, there's not a whole big distinction in terms of the number of students produced. Admittedly, if you have a 3 bedroom apartment, you're gonna likely have maybe another. We're trying to identify, we're trying to have blanket rules for all of the units, and whether they're located in sub-area 3 or sub-area 4, for instance, I don't know that it changes the overall projection. The concept behind the unit bank was, because we don't know exactly, when we roll up our sleeves and start, you take these things to market and you say, hey, would you like to build a mixed-use community here? They'll be like, well, what's the zoning? And we'll be like, well, there is no zoning. So we have to almost set the market ourselves by putting these rules in place. And then we wanted to have the flexibility within reason to move those units around based on market conditions. And, we've attributed a baseline number of units to, and I'll get into more of an explanation of this in a moment of the mechanics, a baseline number of units to sub-area 3 and sub-area 4 that if we meet the other development standards, we would be able to develop in those areas. We then have another, and I think that totals 750 units between the two. The remaining units, whatever that math is, are in this bank. And the intention is to give this body, city council, whomever it may be, through the final development plan process, the ability to evaluate whether those units, when they come out of the bank, are more appropriate to be placed in one place or another. And we thought that was good for you and us because it gave you another bite at the apple to determine if they were appropriately located and the number of units is appropriate in that location. The alternative is to place them, half of them in one, half of them in the other, but it sort of yields a result that we don't think is gonna be responsive to the market, and we're gonna be right back in front of you asking for another rezoning to change that rule. So we were trying to remain flexible enough to respond to the market, but also give you a chance to look over a proposal that would move those units.
Okay.
one of the.
Yes, please.
To Aaron's description, it's an opportunity for the commission and the council to evaluate the units and the unit banks, but to look at that as the one and only item that you're looking at when you're evaluating it, you will be evaluating the plans as a whole. Spoke previously about the parking and open space. We haven't even touched on architecture and site planning and the setbacks from roads, a whole myriad of things that this community has the opportunity to then evaluate. One of them will be the density of the project. The other is the parkland and open space. You know, this is a 400-acre area, 400-plus acre area. There was a slide that we looked at previously that showed some of the topography and the unique characteristics specifically on the eastern portion of this area. All of those things need to go into a healthy evaluation of a project. Is it appropriate or is it not? Does it meet our expectations for parkland and preservation and open space, which are two totally different things, thank you for that comment, and need to be addressed separately, or not? So the flexibility built into that housing bank component is very similar to all those other pieces and parts that need to be evaluated individually. You know, the last thing I'll add to that conversation is how does it meld with or contribute to the overall sense of place? The other projects that have already been built or that remain open, right? So that when you evaluate a project, you can look at it and say, well, geez, it really doesn't coordinate too terribly well, or the architecture isn't meeting our expectations, and it doesn't feel like a whole place. This feels like a series of apartment complexes, which is not what anyone wants. This is a overall development that we need the flexibility, and you need the flexibility to evaluate in a holistic manner.
Thank you. And I think we've even had some discussions with MKSK about accounting for the units, and I, for one, think that's going to be a simple matter, the way we've drawn this up. I think we're going to be required as a part of getting a plan approved to submit a document to your planner, or I can't remember if it's the city manager I said, but we'll sign off on it and say, hey, look, if with this approved, we believe we have the rights to do X number of units here, there are this number remaining in the bank, and this number over here. That's the way it sits. The city staff reviews it, and they have to either sign it, and we put it in a file, well, I'll put it in a file that we agree that that's the status, or they say, oh, wait a minute, we disagree, and then we have a dialogue until we get there. But there'll be a reset of that with every project so that we don't lose track of it.
Okay.
Can I have a little bit of expanse on that issue?
Yeah.
Wow, well, let him finish.
On pages 8 and
We have
16.
a couple more questions on the bank though, because I think the
All right.
bank is
You want me sticking
the
with that
bank's
for
a
a
new
second?
topic. That's a new topic to us that we
So-
haven't worked through in
so-
Johnstown. So one thing that I want to make sure is, as things change, as we go through it, you know, oh, we have a little more acreage here, we have some more acreage here, and I want to make sure we don't get in that shell game of things moving around and around. As staff changes, this could be a 10, 20-year build out, and what I want to make sure is that all of a sudden we don't have a lot of unplanned density in one area or projects that we never anticipated in another, because things change over 10, 20 years.
Sure.
So I want to make sure that we're adequately policing that and making sure that it's, you know, that it's all documented. So I want to make sure that we have the staff and things to be able to do that.
Sure.
So my concerns with the land bank concept are, I want to circle back where Ben started to with the formula of the density. It makes no sense to me why we're doing an overall density calculation of 3 when there was only residential allowed in 3 of those areas. So in my mind, let's scrap that 3 per acre and just come up to a density agreement on each of those units that, and I'm not saying that I disagree with, what is it, 7.5 or 9 per acre in sub-area 3. I'm not saying that I'm opposed to that density, but let's just call it what it is and agree on that for that parcel. It's more clear in my mind. My other concern with the bank is
Jesse,
that,
my thought process with that, since you're on it, and I'll get into the detail with that. if you just utilize the acreage for the 3 sub-areas that have allowability for homes, it's a third of the number of homes that you're proposing. Sections 3, 4, and 5 have a housing component to it. And if you utilize 3 units per acre, which I don't think is out of the norm, especially relative, another piece that I have a note down here is how does that compare to the balance of the city? And other developments that we've had proposed to us where you have differing densities with different type of housing. We've always tried to give ourselves a benchmark to understand, is that Concord East? Is that Leafydale? How does that benchmark against where it is now? So that's one piece that I want to take away from it. But 156 acres between sub areas 3, 4, and 5 would net 469 homes at 3 units per acre.
And our code doesn't say 3 units per acre anywhere, so
No.
that's just something that you guys put in there as a benchmark.
It does. I
It
think
does say.
in multifamily, we did have a use, but the magic of the PD district
PD is it
it's
scraps all that.
negotiable.
Multifamily is much higher.
Yeah, multifamily, I think is 5 per acre.
But I want to come back to an additional layer on the bank issue, how that relates to it. So our code is not very strong on limiting additional parcels being added to the PUD. It doesn't have to be contiguous. It can be any property that you own. Doesn't have to be near the PD district, is eligible to be added to the PD district. So theoretically, there could be a parcel that we don't know about that you guys own over here that could be eligible for 400 more units, and with density that may not be appropriate to that area. And there's not a lot of controls in our process. I don't really have a problem with you guys allocating them in between the units you have here. What my biggest concern is what additions are to the PD district are going to be created as we go forward, and what mechanisms can we limit our risk or our ability for feedback on that. And honestly, the code's a little complex, but if we could maybe language could be added to limit where those, things could be utilized too. Because right now, it seems strange that you guys own all those banked units, and so you're taking the Port Authority's acreage and you guys are getting credit for all those, you guys own all those banked units. And, you guys gotta make your money.
Can I jump in? Not
Yeah.
necessarily on the Port Authority. I think that's a separate issue, and that's something you may want to circle back to. But to specify, because it's a great question, Jesse. If we start to do some additional areas that in this PD district does have some of that capability, there are some measures of proximity, distance
Half
to
mile.
the. Yep, half a mile.
Well, it actually says though that that's not even a requirement here. You'll be eligible regardless of whether the thing is contiguous, if
Correct.
the property's owned, or prong 2 of that test is that it's within a half mile and owned by a common owner of a portion of the PD. So
Correct.
It would come
It doesn't
back
have
to
to be
us, though.
contiguous, but to Ryan's point, so if another area was added, it does not have the same necessarily rights as the original. That's another conversation.
I'm still
and
trying
Trevor
to
and I
get
have
my
talked
head
about
around
it a little
that.
bit. Trevor, I'm going to let you speak specifically to that, because we have some of these internal conversations about how that would have to come back for an approval. It's not a duplication of a Xerox machine to where that's the formula that's used now for everything. And go ahead, Trevor.
Yeah, so I really just want to comment on the procedure, not the density discussion here, but really in terms of procedure. Let's say that 6 months down the road or a year down the road, the applicant comes back and they want to add 100 more acres or something like that. We will go through the exact same process that we're going through tonight to do that in addition.
So each additional parcel comes right back to this step.
It's an amendment to that initial PD, and so just because they're just because they are including additional lands within this PD does not mean by default that they have the same rights as this PD. You can basically say that, we gave you, if you choose to, we gave you your residential units in this first phase. We don't see the need for them because this is continuing further west or something like that. Again, it's a negotiation through this, so just because whatever's approved with this PD does not mean that exact same thing has to be copied and approved down the line.
We would go through the same process again, it's a rezoning.
Okay,
application.
okay, so a little bit of, okay,
So
that was my
really-
main procedural of how those two
Procedural
things
issue
melded.
is one of the ticket to entry, so if we meet one of those criteria, you know, one of the reasons I like it is if we have a piece of property here that is next to one of these sub areas and all of a sudden it comes under our ownership, it makes sense to make it a part of this. If, you know, there's some, you know, the other thing is if you're a master developer and you have a track record of doing good things here, right now, the way your code's written is you have to have 350 acres. So if I have 20 acres down the road that, you know, right now, I mean, I know warehousing distribution, the sub-area 2 was part of the conversation, but I wanted to do warehousing and distribution a half, you know, quarter of a mile down the road. Your code right now doesn't even allow that, so the only way to get that use allowed, if it's appropriate, would be to write it into a PD, so that gives at least our group the ability to add something like that, but we have to go through this process again to approve it.
So, okay, because our code doesn't specifically say that you come in at the preliminary step, my question was whether it would come in for just a final approval. So if you guys added some language to that effect in your plan, in your zoning code, I think that would alleviate my concern.
I don't know that that's needed just because the way the PD code is written, and I mean, if you all volunteer to do that, so be it. But I don't think that that's necessarily needed just because the way the procedures are written is that if they want to add property to this, they would have to amend that preliminary master plan again. So it would be this step, it wouldn't be just a final, it wouldn't be anything administrative, it would be the process that we're going through here. And that is by default how the code is written, how it operates.
Yeah, I mean, if it makes everybody more comfortable, we could include something, please make that note on your list. And
Yeah, we just want to
I
make
think
sure
it
there's a
doesn't-
vetting process to come back through. I think that's what you're after, correct? You want a vetting process if there's expansion of the district?
My reading of this code doesn't specifically say where the amended plan goes.
I know that was an intent.
Doesn't say where it lands.
That was a part of the conversation we had initially. That was the intent.
Yeah, and so the way it would shake out is that Division E in 116401 is your ticket to ride, right? But then it would go to 116402, which is establishment of the PD district. So for that new parcel or set of parcels, it comes back through just like this. Its approval could be conditioned on, you know, any number of things, and its own text could say a different density, a different mix of uses, different development standards.
Okay.
But still be considered part of this.
So I thought we thought it made it a little bit easier to add on a parcel to an existing plan that was in process.
It only
but that's not-
provides eligibility.
It's not the case, okay. That clears up my issues with that, that part of the portion of the risk for the land bank. So thank you for bearing with me there for a second.
Yeah, and I just want to address Ben's question too about the gross acreage calculation. So typically, when most developers will come in front of a planning commission, they'll have one site they want to get zoned, it's a one-off. With the benefits of doing master planning, and I'll kind of reiterate, I've done this, I've talked to you guys about kind of where our role is in the process. But typically, like a 3-story apartment project is often 12 units per acre. And the reason why we think about it from a gross acreage standpoint is one of the things that we like to focus on is helping balance the tax bases, the city as well. So as we bring new industry in, how does that relate to the number of residents too? So where our role is, think of us as land sellers and horizontal developers, and we focus on things that are just horizontal. Other developers, most likely your typical developers, will come in and focus and present to you the vertical plan. They'll show you the pretty pictures and they'll tell you what you want. You'll get in the weeds with them, talking about setbacks and species of trees and brick colors and things like that. So what we're trying to do is, with the city, establish this process, this long relationship, but basically establish the rules for future development. So, and what Aaron mentioned, like, we can't just go to the market right now and say, hey, we have a site, it's not zoned yet. We want to get some guardrails in place that protect us, that protect the buyer, that protect the city, and make sure that everybody is kind of on the same playing field so that we know when we go to the market, we could tell people, here's the rules that you can develop by. And it's not just with the residential, with the industrial sites, which we made the commitment, we want to bring the industrial first too. And we work a lot with site selection committees, and I like to always call them site elimination committees, because they just look for like whatever, how can we just check you off the list, right? And the simpler we can make this package to the market, we can attract quality tenants too. And if we can we want to attract the best possible vertical developers too. And we want to make sure that the city is protected, that we're not just endless amount of units, but it comes with a corresponding number of jobs and a corresponding number of income tax too, as we think about this holistically. So.
I totally get that, and I
Yeah.
appreciate the explanation.
That is a good explanation, yeah, because it
My-
that does make sense for me at least.
My point in addressing it and looking at it and continuing to look at density is first of all, from the logical standpoint of only having 3 spaces where it's allowed, but using the entire acreage and the double counting it for other development. But to that end, also being, and I said at the last meeting too, also being protective of what we have to offer and not utilizing this tool to solve a regional housing problem, regional housing call-out within 150 acres that now becomes Johnstown. And I still have concerns about connectivity, mobility, walkability, having this development in an island type of sense, whether or not it's intentional. It's facing Intel, and the backyard feels like it's pointing toward Johnstown. That's an emotional reaction, but there's a lot more to talk about with that. But that's just where I'm coming from, and I get it. And I get needing to provide housing for workforce, and I get density, and I get you have 3,000 at Intel, and we're looking at providing 1,200 homes that could very well house 3,000 people. And I think I said it 2 years ago, it took Johnstown 200 years to reach 3,000 people. And now we've got it 2 miles down the road, another Johnstown, in a matter of 5 years. So there's a lot to consider emotionally, physically, logically when it goes into all this. But I continue to look at the density piece and the housing piece, not that I don't think it's necessary,
Yeah.
but just how it's applied, because this continues to be, and multiple people called it out, it's a precedence-setting type of development.
I couldn't agree more and sympathize, and I really appreciate that insight. Tom and I get really excited when we talk about connectivity, because that's right in our wheelhouse. Unfortunately, we don't really necessarily have a completely blank slate to work with. But when you talk about 3,000 people, Intel's going to have, if we do nothing right now, Intel's going to still have 3,000 employees on site, plus 7,000 construction workers on phase 1. I think it's appropriate for Johnstown to capitalize and also control and shape the growth too. So I completely hear what you're saying.
Yeah, I just want to put that, it's all part of the consideration. I'm trying to keep it high level for sure. I'm gonna segue on your vertical building piece,
Okay.
if that's okay.
Yeah, good.
If that's, because I get the other topic, pages 8 and 16 talk about building height.
Yeah, we're gonna,
Page 16.
I have a question from Walter I was gonna bring up on that too.
Page 16 talks about building height, architectural standards, 5.4A, maximum height being 85 feet, multi-story hotels. Number one, has there been any conversation with the fire department? That's always within our code about how high they can reach, who would service that area. That has played a part into maximum heights within other areas that we've had. I'm sure there's mutual service agreements, but it's primarily going to be serviced by Monroe Township, I would assume. I don't think the trustees are here anymore, but I just wanted to call that piece out.
Those are certainly details that we need to get in the weeds on, and this is going to be a long process. We've done numerous outreach with various stakeholders, and certainly we have not touched everybody yet. So,
Sure.
so.
Totally fine. I just wanted to call it out. Something
no,
I
I
came
appreciate
across. I just wanted to bring it to your attention if you had.
Yeah, previously, we've had conversations in zoning capping out our height at whatever the fire department can reach today. And I wanna say, what is that, about 50?
Yeah.
Something like that, yeah.
Whatever the
So-
height of the silos are
Right.
at Ohio Pac, I think was the
Right.
max.
Yeah, so I think we're about 50 now. Now, saying that, I understand that you may have uses that you want to do. I know the skyline down there has been amended because of Intel. I think they're at like 9 stories at this point. Do I want to see 9-story buildings? Probably not. But, you know, that's what the skyline currently has. So when you're talking about height, I do think we have some room to play in there. But obviously, if we can't service that and it's not safe, there's no point in going down that road.
If I may quickly add just some context, very valid points, especially keeping the fire department in mind. Just for everyone's understanding, 85 feet will yield about a 6-story building under modern contemporary construction typologies. Generally, you have 20-foot first floors and then generally 12 to 14 feet floor to floor above that. So that will be about 6 stories, which from our understanding is also equivalent thereabouts to what Intel will have. Their office-facing portions on the northern side of the site are also proposed to be about 6 stories. So just keeping that in mind,
How tall are the diffusers? I think they're diffusers, that's what they're called.
they're taller,
Right.
however, they are set back further.
Right.
And with the berms and everything that will be there, it should screen those a little better than the office buildings immediately kind of adjacent to Green Chapel there.
I appreciate that insight. We got a little ahead of us. We have spent some time already internally looking at utilities as opposed to building heights. Most of our studying's been underground, but for example, we want to maximize the gravity we can to minimize operational costs in the city when it comes to sewer and water. So there are little nuances that we're getting into the details, and those will show up in the plan. Somebody might not see it, but there's drivers like that that drive where we put things. So.
Yeah, and I call it out purely because if 60 feet's the max and you want to do an 85-foot building, I'd rather call it out now than further down the development road.
And there's 2 ways to look at it. If you have a higher building, then you're saving ground space. You're eliminating sprawl into other areas. You're freeing up areas for more park space, other uses, more amenities, things like that. So there's 2 ways to look at it. Do we want a really tall building? Maybe, maybe not. Do we want to impede on the skyline? Probably not. But we do have other buildings that are out of our control that have ended up higher in the area. So part of being a master plan city, you can focus things on that area and not at others. That's my point on height. I know that other members of the commission asked the same thing about height, and I think we had some emails from the community about height of buildings.
It's a good point, and we're not going to be able to partner with any vertical developers on a project if they don't think they can get a fire truck to serve
Right.
the upper floors, right? So there'll be some private, just regulation of it, just what the market's going to tell. I keep referencing the market, but yeah, we've got to make sure that if we're going to go that high, we can get it serviced.
Sure, fair enough.
And I would say one thing that could be done to address that if there's not currently fire apparatus to serve a certain height is to, let's say 85 is the number that the commission and council is comfortable with, but condition that approval, that on a final development plan submittal, they have to demonstrate, through a letter from the fire department that there's sufficient apparatus to service.
Totally makes sense.
So, then you have both the private regulation and a public regulation of what that maximum height could be because of fire apparatus.
The only thing that I would say that as the less conditions to put, the easier it's going to be to track.
That is true, and
I agree with you.
We'll aspire to have no conditions.
Right. Absolutely.
There's a first time for everything.
Communities is that, before we are able to have a vote by council, your conditions, to the extent they can be at that point in time, are placed into the text, so they're already dealt with. There may be a few stragglers that you can't deal with for various reasons, but that might be another way to deal with it.
Perfect, absolutely. Page 17, talking about building design. There's a mention of solar energy systems. Talk about solar panels being permitted on the roof of the building, provided they're not visible from adjacent public streets and right-of-ways. Also talks about building designs, all types, things of that nature, elements such as meter boxes. I'm on page 17 under CV, C5.
Okay.
Solar energy systems should be excluded from the requirements of this section. Is there any consideration of solar outside of attached to structure? I didn't see it within any allowable, conditional, permitted, et cetera, within the proposed area being being talked about.
Yes, there are instances where solar is used. Oftentimes, you'll see them in an array over parking fields.
Mhm.
A little tricky to do sensitively in a way that I think folks would be receptive to. But the answer to your question is yes, there are examples where it would not be strictly on the building.
Okay.
Are you thinking, Mr. Lee, of solar as a primary use and making sure that that's not?
That was the first instance that I had seen solar mentioned up to that point. Again, I'm not through the entirety of the document. It said it was excluded from that particular section with respect to building design, so it was more from a, if you have a certain amount of open space that you aren't using, could you put it ground level and not on the roof of a particular structure, as this is written today. I also noticed that in the beginning of the document, it sets itself up as an exclusionary document relative to its supersessionability to the code.
Right, there's nothing I've seen in here that would permit solar as a primary or even as a standalone accessory use on a property.
Perfect.
So, yeah.
Curiosity, thank you. Page 24 talks about traffic analysis. It talks about the Lincoln County Transportation Improvement District. That SID is planning to construct significant improvements for Clover Valley Road, Duncan Plains, et cetera. And it feels like it reads to me as if it leaves up a lot of development to the TID, or a portion of development of roads and infrastructure to the TID, but doesn't go so far as to confirm that it's going to happen. If it doesn't happen for whatever reason, funding falls through, something else comes through, in an emergency sense, what's the alternative if those previously understood to be TID funded improvements don't happen? I didn't see that enumerated.
For Sean, I don't know if you probably have a lot more information than I do about where that stands, so I want to address the question.
Sure.
Do you mind do you know what the latest is on any of that?
So I think what we're talking about is part of that state funding, the $90 million that rolled out. Now, obviously, that's not all specifically for this project as much as I wish it was. That's spread out through multiple counties and multiple areas. But the state, and we're super grateful, and we've been having these dialogues with them for the last year, have leaned into the awareness that what's happening out here is not a direct reflection of what we've done, but maybe some other things that have happened. And they're taking responsibility for that, and they want to help us be able to alleviate some of these traffic conditions that may exist, specifically around Intel and in the New Albany Business Park in a totality. I mean, you've got not only Intel, but you've got Amgen, you've got Pharmavite, you've got the Van Trust that just released with DVC.
DBT?
DSV.
There you go.
DSV.
Thank you. Alphabet soup time. It's getting late in the night. Could be ABC by the time we're done. Or 10 TV.
You're going to be on for sure?
Right. Whew, getting far in. So with that, there are specific funds that are going to be appropriated. At this point, we have had conversations with Bill Lozier with the TID. They're much in a similar situation as we are, and we are trying to get together our plan for it. MKSK and our engineering staff were at the last meeting, roughly 3 weeks ago. That was kind of the kickoff. So I say that kickoff 3 weeks ago because that's kind of where we're at. We're going to be running very fast to try to get some of these things identified. There has been a great collaboration because as soon as this landed, we immediately reached out, and Bill reached out to us knowing that what they're doing is also going to be impacted by this particular development. So there will be a dance and a coordination with the TID. This time, I don't have specifics other than to tell you everyone is aware, and all the players that are a part of these planning conversations and funding conversations are in the same room having the conversations, not to keep New Albany Company or Johnstown Land Company off the hook. There is a definite expectation that they're going to be a participant in any type of traffic that happens in here. There's a couple call outs. Obviously, for any type of signalization, turn lanes. I've mentioned roundabouts, which they've graciously included, because those seem to be a trend, and they're a little bit more expensive sometimes than a traffic signal. So there's going to be a traffic study, impacts, all those things are going to have to be spelled out in a little bit more detail as we walk through this, and there is a general obligation that I think they're aware of, that they're going to have to be a participant in the conversation.
I think if it came to that, then we're gonna be in a situation where, I think from our perspective, if there's some major improvement that 2 miles worth of pavement needs to be added or improved, probably our project doesn't work and we're waiting around for the TID or somebody else to step in, or the city. I know the city's current financial situation, so we're probably looking at is if the TID or some other funding mechanism doesn't come into play, just things get delayed until it can be.
Okay.
And I just want to piggyback off of that, just real quickly. All of these roadway improvements are not because of this development. I think it goes without saying, but I just want to highlight.
They're not, but they do factor in, because
Absolutely.
when we have this density come in, it is much easier to fix and repair and get money for those roads than it is to come up here and get it for these roads up here. So that's a great reason to focus any density that comes down there and be able to do it that way, because it's a lot easier to fix those roads than the ones that are here in town.
Totally makes sense. Just wanted to touch on that to make sure that we're on the same page with respect to alternatives. Page 26 starts talking about environmental area buffering and things of that nature. We've had a lot of conversations with different developers here with respect to buffering requirements, especially against dissimilar land use, so residential versus commercial, et cetera. There are defined areas and uses for each of these sub-areas. Totally understand that. And I think we've had some conversations in previous meetings, or in the previous meeting, with some of the folks that live outside of those sub-areas, but in that area in general. And there have been emails that have come across from some of those concerned folks, and rightfully so. And just trying to understand from a higher level thought process, how much consideration is being given relative to open space buffering against those parcels that are outside of the defined sub-areas.
So I think the one thing that we've been cognizant of, because as you can imagine, when the New Albany Business Park has come out into Licking County, and there have been many instances where we've butted up against residential uses. So we have made a lot of strong commitments in here about mounding and landscaping, which I touched on earlier. Mounding, I think, is a minimum of 6 feet tall, with another planting that reaches an opacity, which is, how much you can see through the tree line, right, of 75% within 5 years of planting to whatever rate we said. It's getting late, the numbers are escaping me.
Yeah.
Right.
10 or 14.
I never hold you to numbers
Yeah.
until the final product.
Yeah, so from that respect, we understand there's a buffering component. There are, in terms of green space serving that same purpose, I think there will be instances, maybe we haven't mandated, where you're gonna see buildings set well back from the minimums, only because, oftentimes it's a security question, especially with like a data center use. But to us, making sure the impacts of sound and light and those sorts of things were buffered from those neighbors is what we were focused on.
Okay. Perfect.
One thing with the buffering, I know here in town, currently we have commercial to residential. I think we're 50 to 100 feet in some areas. Now, I know in this area, it's gonna be tougher, because today that's a house that somebody plans to live in for 20 years plus. Tomorrow you buy it. So if I make you put 100-foot buffer between this business park and that house today, and you're already in negotiations with them, and you buy it tomorrow, that's gonna be something that'll be interesting to go through, because we don't know which areas are being purchased. Obviously, we know a lot of property in that area is changing hands. More so the larger parcels first than the smaller parcels, unfortunately. But if you have a 5-acre parcel that they plan to live in for a long time, it's hard, because you can't capture that in zoning. So this guy wants to die on that parcel in 50 years. This guy wants to sell you that parcel when his kids graduate in 5 years. I have to balance out the buffer area between those. And how do you, that becomes a concern.
So I think one thing we've run into, because this isn't our first rodeo, is we have provisions in there that get pretty detailed in terms of if an adjacent property comes under common ownership and we haven't, and, you know, we would otherwise have the requirement to do the buffering, that obligation goes away because we own both sides.
Right.
Now, you come to a point in time where you have put in the buffer and then maybe you go buy that property, that's a different story.
This is fast moving.
Right.
So
Right.
today you do the buffer and this is a 10-year build out. Well, you buy that in year 5. So that's,
Right, and
that's something
I
we
would
have to
say
look
that
at.
technically that buffering and mounding requirement goes away, even though it may already be there.
Right,
So at
you
that
already
point,
built the
there's,
buffer.
You know, there's nothing that would stop you from going in and taking the mound out and expanding that property, but, yeah, it can get into some complicated situations.
okay.
The last two things that I have here are just generalized call out specific to, I can't find the particular pages that I have highlighted thus far, but from a design standpoint, some wording in there that's very generalized with respect to a lot of attention will be paid to X, Y, and Z. And it sounds good. I don't necessarily know what that means or what that product is of the intense focus on, you know, X, Y, and Z. So I tend to encourage shying away a little bit from some of that stuff just to give some more defined parameters to work around. And I can find those if you want it, but just a general call out.
It's something that I deal with in everything I do with these zonings, no matter where or what it is, because architecture is really an art form. So, I mean, there's a lot of structural requirements and things, but it's an art form, and so it's very difficult oftentimes to objectify those things and get the right product. So I can tell you that these architectural standards are 90–95% of what has been used in the business park to date, and that's the result that's been yielded. We also have a property owners association system that has its own private design review requirement that before a third party could propose something to you on ground that we're trying to sell them, they have to go through our process first because we're trying to protect our investment too on the rest of our land. So that's another sort of built-in fail-safe, so to speak.
Yeah, the only thing I would add to that conversation, we've heard from many residents tonight, we want Johnstown to be Johnstown. We know we don't want Johnstown to look or feel like New Albany, right? That message has been delivered loudly and clearly. What that means as it relates to the built environment, that kind of nebulous language in the zoning text, to a certain degree is intentional, because we're gonna have to work with your staff to determine what that means, whether that's a retail center, a hospital, an apartment complex, whatever that use might be. We know what we don't want it to be. It's not entirely clear to us what we do want it to be. So something that is not, something that feels and looks of quality, that is unique and typical of Johnstown is the target. And that's what we tried to do in here with language that's fairly unclear and nebulous. And again, that's intentional so that we have the opportunity to work with your staff.
Okay.
And it actually works kind of both ways, right? If you're on our side, you want as much certainty as you can get.
Mhm.
The fact that we're sort of offering up some subjectivity actually gives you a lot more influence on us as we go through towards specific plans.
Okay.
I think you're gonna see in those areas when you're dealing with some of the larger businesses, obviously, we have an expectation of the business park over there. Things are gonna be a bit more market driven and sterile, but as you get to the daily use things, the retail, the places where people are living, hospitals, things like that, I think we want something, obviously, it's a little more architecturally significant. And we wanna be able to capture that. So when you're dealing with more commercial space, obviously, we want a product that's gonna look good after it's been used and abused for 15 years. And I think something that people are gonna live in and visit daily, I think that's where we're looking for architectural significance that's, because if we mess this up, I joke all the time, if you mess up in the finance portion of the city, you can fix that the next billing cycle probably, but if you mess up the zoning and the look of a business, it's gonna be that way for 100+ years. So we wanna make sure we get that right.
And I think in the mixed use areas, for instance.
Good point.
The placemaking is going to be driven by a lot of things. One of them is going to be architecture, and to make it truly special, we got to get that right. And so, points well taken. And so we want to make sure that on the one hand, we're making commitments to bring a quality product, but on the other, we're not tying our hands inadvertently on everybody's side to get the best product possible. So that's kind of a balancing act.
Perfect. Nope, that makes sense. And the last thing that I'll call out has to do with open space. And I would add a third definition within to that. So open space, parkland, usability. We've had instances where open space has been proposed, but its usability has been negligible and didn't feel like it was a community best type of situation. So if the open space that is being provided, the parklands being provided, is defined as wetlands or preserve or parkland or just generalized general community open space, I think that would help better contextualize and help us understand the vision for the use for that. We may assign it something different, I don't know, but it would help if there is a particular tract that you're offering up as a part of that open space as to what your vision is for that. As it fits within a particular sub-area, specifically the common areas, the residential areas and things like that.
So perhaps, and I think this will happen organically, but perhaps when we bring through a plan that includes that parkland or open space, we need to demonstrate to you our proposal for how it's going to be
What's its
improved
use?
and used.
Yeah.
In some instances, that may be, you may want to put that to the city because it's a sizable piece of land and you may want to plan it during Parks and Rec. So we don't have a problem making some sort of commitment. Then when we come back through with the final development plan, that we have to identify those things.
And again, like, I feel like it would be helpful to the plan to separate parks and open space, parks, land and open space out into two separate categories. Because on the chart they're joined in almost all the, it's gonna make it easier, I think, more clear. I prefer it that way, anyway.
That's all I got for tonight.
Jesse, do you have specific things you want to add?
So while we're on parks, we talked about, there's got to be designated areas, blah, blah, and stuff, because I just didn't see anything specific, like Ben said, in the plan that said park here. And a lot of the drawings I see, a lot of like open spaces with paths. I think we got some opportunities to get some wins for Johnstown by providing some park amenities, because there's a lot of things that we don't have here, and I think it would be valuable to, I think it's a good opportunity for us to provide value to the current residents if we had a tennis court, say, like Johnstown doesn't have tennis courts, so it seems like an easy win, have a park with a tennis court, for example. So maybe getting more specific about, adding some amenities in the park space and not just walking paths, in my mind, is a stronger plan and is one of the few areas where I can see we can easily provide benefits to the larger community outside. So maybe just take that in consideration. Back to the connectivity, you guys are out on a little island out there, which is, has it's good aspects and bad aspects for everything. Having some sort of a plan on how everything ties together, maybe in the future, or now would be something that I'd like to hear some more about. Having all apartment residential units, to me, not a big fan. I'd like to have some, so apartment living, I understand whether our main goal is here is to have Intel employees there. I think the plan would be stronger for our community if some of those units were for sale multifamily units. So, I'm not saying that they have to be condos because those you can't build those anymore, but whether they're townhomes or whatever the market can decide, but I think that if we could designate a portion of those, I don't know all the numbers in your business plan, but I think that it would be a stronger plan for our community because people that live in the community have stronger ties to the long-term future of the community. It's something that I would like to have more discussions about if that's something that, that you guys could move on. I'd like to talk about that. Let's see, in section B, major industrial uses, there's, B3, there's an allowance for alcohol, drug treatment and rehab facilities. I think that should be removed and put in the not allowed category with the, adult entertainment, venues. It's part of my, the manufacturing and production use district. I think there should be some safeguards into, I would like to see some safeguards added as for hazardous material and, you know, things that might be environmentally impactful to the community. Like we had a gentleman talking about, you know, the air quality. I would like to have some controls in there to prevent us from ever having to even come close to that. I haven't read through the whole back section, so I'm not sure if that comes later in the,
Well,
If I may, I caution you a little bit to try and develop regulations related to hazardous materials and things like that, because there are lots of other federal and state regulations that change on a, you know, on a, not a routine basis, but they do change over time, and my fear would be that you all adopt a set of regulations that are then immediately superseded and out of date anyways. There are
is there an effective way to do that, or just you just leave it
We
up
can
to feds
reference,
and
we can
just-
reference current.
I mean, no one,
Current
I
law
know
if
you
we
guys
want
don't
to
wanna.
and say, just like we
You
do
guys-
with ADA compliance.
You can
It has to
point-
follow this standard.
You can point to
And-
Ohio
right.
and federal EPA regulations and just say that, you know, all development has to comply with that, but all development is gonna have to comply with that anyways.
But that's the best protection we have, and I know it's not in anybody's interest to have some chemical plant risks right down the road, so.
We can go further in certain subsections with you know, buffering and things like that if it is an issue. That's something that's easy to do is increase buffering around those types of uses.
And I'm gonna keep rolling through some of this stuff, it's just maybe, I just wanna get on record and we can just agree to talk about more or not. So only the neighborhood commercial use has a maximum square footage, for an occupant. It seems to me that our code has a lot of size limitations on every different type of thing. So this is the only size thing in here. So maybe we want to discuss a little bit more about.
just to make one thing, at least my recollection is that in that, we had I think it was 20,000
Yeah,
square feet
maximum,
per
yeah.
tenant.
To keep big
We
box.
also are mindful that you don't want a bunch of big box users
Yeah,
out here.
right.
So if you go into the section, which I think I can't remember what I call it now, community commercial.
Yep.
I think we're allowed up to 2 users of, was it 75,000 or more?
So,
And so, you know, we'd love a grocery store, something to be here, and that was meant to accommodate something like that. So there's another limit, and then any other uses other than 2 of those uses within, you know, sub-area 4, part of 3, have to meet the 20,000.
Okay.
So multifamily residential, the minimum building is 6 or more living units shall be permitted. So nowhere in this development can we have a building with less than 6 units. Is that basically, we can't even optionally have one with 3. That seems crazy to me that there's a minimum there.
Here again, it was meant more to cater to the type of, the target market. If you guys want it to be less, we'll make it less, but we thought it was another.
You're just establishing a barrier of entry.
That's right, but we don't care what it is.
I would like to have it 3, so let's just put that as something to talk about more. It seems to be crazy to have a minimum of 6. So I'm gonna keep rolling here. For the similar uses, which is section, under the multifamily, I guess it applies to all of them. Similar is 2.4. You implement our process for determination of what's a similar use, which is pretty vague. I'd like to get some more specificity on what a similar use is. That needs to be defined. It's not defined. And then you also, in the appeals process, you guys have a appeal standard that is crazy. It includes illegal, arbitrary, and capricious, unreasonable, unsupported by the preponderance of evidence. So,
Wait, what section is this?
for the similar use, determining what's a similar use.
Ohio legislature
Yeah.
being-
That language is copied and pasted from Ohio Revised Code for administrative appeals, so that appeals under this would be governed by the same standard as an appeal that would go up to common pleas court on a decision.
Yeah.
So, yes, we all
Okay.
have our
That
Ohio
language.
General Assembly to thank for that.
That goes
Well,
down the same compliance code as some of the federal regulations and stuff. That's just the language we're gonna have.
I will cede to the smarter people, the smart man on that then. Just seemed crazy, but I'll take that off the list.
If you have like certain numbers and stuff like that, what I'm gonna do with mine, a lot of the numbers and setbacks and things like that, some of the definitions and things like that, I'm gonna send in an email. Just try to keep it tight and high level tonight. I'll definitely bog you down in the minutia before this is over, I promise you. But yeah, I think for tonight, I wanna keep it high level and concept driven. But there will definitely be some things with setbacks and things like that I definitely email on. I think Ben will probably go down the same route, just some things like that we have.
Mr. Chairman, if I may quickly, I wanted to respond, one thing that Member Koppel brought up. The point you made about the multifamily units, there's nothing in this language that will require them to be for rent units. So there could be potentially for sale. I have no idea if that's, if any of the developers that NACO work with use it on a regular basis. But Bridge Park, for example, taking away all the other character and everything like that, there's a total of 975 units in Bridge Park. Of those, there are almost 250 that are for sale condo units. So there are examples in the region of that's still considered multifamily.
Yeah.
A multifamily product that is for sale versus for rent.
And that's what I'm asking them to add language in there to give me some assurances that some of it will be included in that product, because I think that it does benefit our community.
In the zoning world, it's hard to differentiate when you have condos. We've had this problem other places in the city.
Right.
We'd love to say no apartments, only condos here, but you have to do multifamily. Now, I know under the PD district that there are some developer agreements and some things that you can do like that, and some parameters you can hopefully walk into place. But from a legal standpoint, when you look at black and white zoning,
You could potentially, this is a conversation I've had with Thad, because this has come up in some of the preliminary discussion, and that is a requirement for a percentage to be owner occupied. Now, those are things we're gonna have to check with fair housing and.
Yeah, right. That would not be something done using zoning as the tool.
that's a developer agreement.
Right, to Chairman Green's point, because in zoning, you're regulating land use, and whether it's owner occupied or tenant occupied, it is a residential use of the property, as opposed to if you start regulating by zoning, owner or tenant occupied, then you are regulating the economic relationship that exists with respect to that residential use.
So a hotel, someone lives in a hotel, but they have different rules for a hotel than they do someone that lives in an apartment.
Now, that is considered a transient occupancy, even somebody who's in a long-term stay hotel, and I will tell you that, that line between long-term or extended stay hotel and traditional hotel causes people like, Trevor, Chris, and I pull our hair out.
All right.
Because you get that
Yeah,
gray
yeah.
zone,
So what's the what effective vehicle could we use, whatever, you could say an HOA agreement, for example, could limit what your owner occupancy is. Would that be something that they could record a burden like they are on the 975? I'm just brainstorming, you're my legal guy there, but are there mechanisms we can use to achieve this goal?
It is possible. It is not necessarily an area I'm inclined to brainstorm.
Maybe we could just look into that, yeah.
It's hard to do the legal thing.
If we can
It's
look
easy-
into
It's
that.
much easier to have a developer agreement to get that sort of thing done.
Yeah,
Right.
and
And
if
everything
you
we
guys
have-
are open to it, we
And
can,
as
it'd be
somebody
easy,
who
I
wants to
guess,
do
right?
business with us in the future, if you have a development agreement and it's broken, next time you come back to negotiate with us, it's harder. So I think that's probably an easier vehicle to get that done.
All right, I'm still, I got a couple more. The post-zoning review process, Article 4, for the major economic development plans, it says it goes to a CODA administrative board. I'm not sure if that jives with our city charter says that all zoning, the Planning and Zoning Commission shall have the power and duty to hear applications for land use zoning classifications, blah, 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 recommendation for legislative action. I feel like that circumvents the shall language in our charter, so I'm not sure if that can be implemented. We can maybe look into that in the meantime, and I'm almost done. Go ahead, Ryan. I think that's my list tonight.
All right.
As far as I made it.
I'll keep it brief here. But yeah, so going through this, obviously, starting like page 2 there, we have the regulatory concept. So it says certain baseline zoning rights will be applied throughout the district. That's where I'm gonna send an email. There's some different things that we already have in zoning that apply to a lot of this. Now, it probably doesn't make sense to reference our zoning code and say, subsection B of this does this, but I think we start there. I think we're gonna start with our zoning on a lot of this, and we're gonna expand on it. So where you have things, like I'm talking about with setbacks, where you're talking about trees, where you're talking about things like that, a lot of the definitions, I saw some uses that it may or may not be right. I know that, I saw something like funeral homes, I saw some things like that. It helps to define them, but I wanna make sure that I want to make sure we keep this as uses that benefit us. Not all the retail is going to benefit us. Some of the uses that are listed in here aren't going to benefit us. We definitely want to keep to high-level employee uses. I know there's going to be some amenities and some retail and things like that to help with this. But I definitely, if we define them, I understand that, but the usage, I think some of the usage needs scaled back. I'll send some emails on that.
That's a good point.
And then, like I saw in here, it was like barber shops, beauty salons, things like that. Drive-throughs, I don't know that we want drive-throughs in the area. There's probably some conversations we need to have on some minor things like that. One area I did like the wording, it says hotels with or without conference centers, provided that each individual room for lodging is accessed using a door that is interior to the building. So that's giving us a higher end hotel. Did like that. I want to give you some credit in there somewhere. We're not doing any motels, so things like that. I did like some of that. I'll send some of those over in emails just to keep this quick. I did see in here, written determinations by zoning inspector. Again, my call out before, I want to make sure that we have staff in place to be able to police this adequately. And that's probably more on us than it is, on the applicant, but that's something I do want to take a look at internally, because to go through a document this large with a zoning inspector that works 3 days a week, that's something that we might want to look at. He's great, but I want to make sure we're adequately staffed. So obviously the residential uses, and our density, I think that needs some revision on how we get to that number. I want to take a look at the housing aspect there, and see how much we do. Obviously, I'm pro home ownership, not so much transient, not so much rentals, things like that. I mean, our current rental situation in the city is over 51%. So there are a lot of rentals that are here in town. And I'm going to be pro home ownership on that one. So how we can whittle that down, and especially to make sure that our school district can absorb that kind of growth. I know that we're talking about the numbers being lower for that sort of thing, but I want to make sure that we're doing the best we can.
Is it less appealing to you guys to have that, like the difference, a requirement of, just curious on, from the business side, is that a big difference for you guys, or?
Well, I think there's probably some market there for the sorts of things you're talking about. I think largely it's going to, correct me if I'm wrong, largely it's the rental market. Correct. But we're also cognizant of owner occupancy brings with it some other results.
It does.
Other impacts, right? So that's kind of why we ended up all in the one spot.
Nice thing about them is it usually breeds HOAs, which keep the place up to a certain standard too, so there's benefits in there. Some other things, just small things I had, where we talk about blank walls, things like that, fit some murals in there. That's a call out I know we've had recently. And then just kind of going through here, the architectural aspects. Want to make sure, like I said, that we do have significant architecture in the area. These are new buildings. You're starting from scratch. They plan to be there for a long time. We want to make sure things are significant. When you have a commercial use, I get it. It's going to be more about use. It's going to be more about function. I know on tree preservation was something I had. We do have some great documents on tree preservation and what we expect there. I'd like to see those referenced. If our staff could add some things like that in there somewhere, I would like to see things like that in there. Setbacks, things of that nature. I know anywhere where it's gonna butt up against a residential use, especially a residential use that plans to be there, something obvious that plans to be there for a while, I wanna make sure that we're doing right by them. And pretty much, I think that's, a lot of my notes are gonna be, I'm not gonna bog you down with tonight, but some takeaways that I did have. I appreciate you mentioning about the Gateway project. That was me. Our gateways are on 37 and 62. That's kind of what I see our gateways as. I took a lot of feedback on that. Those are the gateways. I know this is going to be a lot of people's initial gateway coming from all of those projects into Johnstown, down Mink. But I just don't think it's the gateway.
I love the name contest. Everybody emailed the zoning commissioner with your naming ideas. Or email Sean.
Opportunity, I don't know, for me, you got, it's a corridor. Yeah, everybody email Sean, there you go. For me, it's a corridor.
And it's done.
So yeah, opportunity corridor, something cool, I don't know. Something like that, I think works, but the main thing that I want to impress is we have to make sure the traffic's right, we have to make sure the look's right. I don't want it to be an island. One thing that I also talked about was down 62, we spent a lot of time making that a semi-walkable area and talking about that the last few years. These things are not gonna walk there. People are not necessarily gonna walk down through there. I don't necessarily wanna give that up, but I wanna make sure that we have a smooth transition into our areas that we've already built out. So, I know it's hard to say who's gonna buy what and what's gonna change hands in the next 10, 20 years, but I wanna make sure we have a plan in place for an easy.
Connectivity
Yeah,
points.
the connectivity is a big thing for us. We are quietly the most walkable city in Licking County. So I know other cities would like to have that, but we do. So I wanna make sure that works out for us the best that it can.
That's fair.
I know that, the property that was the Port Authority property, I think that originally started out as housing. Was that with Beazer Homes back in the day?
Going way back.
It was way back, yeah.
Beazer, I believe originally the development got annexed in as a PUD development through Beazer, at that point in time owned it. And I do not have any recollection as far as what those density levels looked like projection wise. I know there were single family units which are consistent with Beazer, but then the housing market crashed, and through some wrangling and partnerships and negotiations, we were able to convince the property owner on the north side of the street to allow the opportunity for that to be an employment center, realizing the transportation infrastructure existed a little bit better on that side of town. And that's where we're at now. And I think
It's been a couple things within history.
it's probably better than the alternative. That single family obviously impacts the school district a little bit more. So we were trying to lean into an employment center for tax-based revenue, less burden on the school district, so.
Right. So I think that's something to think about, though. I know it was mentioned, I think Todd called it out, of the previous uses on there. Then we had another project that was going to go in there. We took a look at walkability was a big thing that we talked about there, and how that transitions and how it works with the neighbors. So I would expect the same with this project. We held them to a standard, so we'll hold this to a standard of walkability. And that's the big thing. I mean, to everybody out there watching, this is a project we have to work with. This is a corridor that we have to work with here. It's going to be developed. It's one of the hottest pieces of real estate, I mean, on this side of the country. which is neat to have here. A lot of people say, "Oh, it's Johnstown," but hey, it's Johnstown, right? I mean, we're here. So if people were surprised that people showed up here, you shouldn't have been. We've been working hard for years. So we want to see a good product in this. It could be developed by several other entities that may not have our best interests at heart. So we want to make sure that we get it right, we don't lose our identity, and that we move along forward, and it's something that we can absorb. So I want to impress upon that. I'll ask our other members of the commission if you have anything, and I'll probably open up one more time to public comment now that you guys.
That's brave. It's good. It's a
It
late
is
hour,
brave, but
man. It's a late hour.
These
I
guys
gotta
have
get to
sat
bed.
here. You guys have sat here, and I really appreciate it.
1 minute rebuttal.
This was a high level meeting. A lot of meetings we get into really get down into it. If you've ever sat here and watched us go through zoning, we take some time to go through these things. So
That's fair enough.
appreciate it. If you have any questions, I'm sure we stirred up some emotions through all that. Does anybody have anything? Yes, in the
Come on
back,
up.
if you'd like to come up.
Sorry, I'm trying to step on your feet now.
No, you're good. You're good.
Cindy Duke, live right off Concord Road. So I know it's probably in that document somewhere, I never made it all the way through it myself. But I'm another environmental conservative person too, and so I was wondering how you figure the amount of open space or park space, whatever you wanna call it, like you can put near a residential area. How you know how much of that you can allow? Can you tell the developer has to be at least this minimum amount per like so many units or per so many single family homes that it wasn't?
Yeah, we definitely have metrics that are in there, and maybe that's something that we could define a little bit more in this document.
1,500 square feet per residential unit.
Yeah. Yeah.
Or $45,000 per acre.
But that's parkland, but is there another open space requirement?
Open space it was changed to open space from parkland.
Right.
That was the amendment that was done in July.
And maybe it's something we could do a little more job defining, but
That's
we'll
how
make
we
sure
got
to
to-
capture that in there because we
So
want to
there
make
is
sure
no
it's
parkland
adequately.
requirement now? It's just open
enforced.
space?
Open space, yeah.
No, there's a parkland requirement, but open space is separate from the calculation of park space. They are defined differently, just to specify, but there is a separate call out.
It was
for
the other way,
park.
it went from parkland.
What's the metrics on open space? Do we know off the top? I haven't
So
gotten that far back in
that's-
here.
That's one of the pluses and minuses of a PED district, that you can have these conversations. I think the applicant probably has a general idea of what they would like to see as far as open space, but
They haven't come up with a
correct me if I'm
formula.
wrong, I don't believe there's a metrics in there that says 5% open
There's not.
space per acre of development. I think it's a conversation that you have to be comfortable with. I know currently in our light manufacturing, I believe it's 10, GCC 1 and 2, I think it's 35. So there's different metrics that exist out there. Residential obviously has a different requirement for impervious lot coverage as well. So all those things are part of that conversation that
We probably want to pull some of those lot coverage, I don't know. That's a good point, though, because it's in our regular code, but it's not specifically pulled into this language in the same terminology. So there's an opportunity there, I think.
And then they talk about the stream corridor in that, I think, section 5.4, I think it was J. I wasn't quite sure, I didn't really understand the wording. So it had to be, but a stream area of at least a minimum of 100 feet wide.
That's gonna be EPA and probably Army Corps of Engineer driven, I would imagine, on buffer areas like that.
Because I know. there's like-
I don't mind making them bigger, but
Well, even areas that are smaller, like the swamps and boggy areas, like we're still like there, I don't understand why they're not letting the natural areas where water sits naturally, why they can't work around that, but they're building up. I wasn't sure why they're changing the whole landscape there, as I look through the trail and I'm walking down there.
oh yeah, that's totally separate issue. This one here, I don't know if you saw on this one though, there's a pretty wide margin. Where you have the drainage areas, there's a pretty wide margin in there, but I would assume everything's probably EPA and Army Corps of Engineer driven on a lot of that. But, no, we definitely appreciate that. Those are good things to look at.
So we do have some lot
We
coverage,
do have a
80%
stormwater.
in here.
I know
That
Ben's gonna
stuff's
tell
in
you all
here,
about the
yeah.
stormwater runoff.
I missed that part. So we do have 80% lot coverage. There's some setback stuff, so we do have some of that in here.
And there is, in the PD code, right, there's a required dedication of parkland, that's acreage per residential unit. Open space is privately owned, presumably, and one of the things that the PD district code, chapter 1164, talks about there is that this code that they're proposing, that will be the actual zoning, sets out how that's going to be programmed as open space. Maybe some of it's common area, maybe it is passive recreation, et cetera. And so that's something that, you know, this group and council will have to refine as it moves through the process.
We haven't come to the point of where we have got that detailed plans received yet to see exactly what their plans are, but so that I think that'll be later in the process is probably my understanding, right? Okay, yeah.
Thank you. All right, other public comment? Go ahead.
Just ask my question. Oh, sit down now. Andrea Ford, I just want to know, like, if you could kind of recap, like, how this process works. This proposal comes to you, you do some reviews. You know,
Yeah,
public.
we'd be happy to.
I just need to.
Yeah. Yeah, we'd be happy to. Sean, if you'd like to.
I'm gonna, because it's so late.
Or do you want to go to
I'm gonna
legal?
defer to Trevor and
Trevor.
Chris because.
I was going with that. All right.
Well,
We can all participate.
it'll be a group effort.
Our consulting team, take it away.
So this is the first of a several step process. Overall, at the end of the day, sorry, not the end of the day, this process is designed to be a preliminary master plan with a zoning text, which is what we're reviewing this evening. And then before any development can occur, for those areas which are intended to be developed first or whatever phase they're participating in, that plan, will be much more detailed than what's on the screen here, will come back in the same setting to be heard in a public forum. And after that is approved, then the applicant can move forward with development of the land under that final master plan. So while there's just one preliminary master plan that you see here, there may be one final master plan, or there may be 10 final master plans. And that's up to the applicant to decide how and the timing of when those different pieces and parts need to come online. And so, again, this kind of sets, again, the high level, maximum density, maximum intensity, things like that. But the more fine grained details of where a building's located, what do streetscapes look like, that sort of thing, that's determined as part of the final master plan. And on top of that, the final master plan has to be consistent with this preliminary master plan. So, for example, the applicant could not come in with a final master plan for sub-area 4 that says, actually, we're just gonna do all employment-based uses here, because that's not what was agreed to and approved as part of the preliminary development plan. And so that's the way generally the process works. So this will be back before this commission, at least once more, if not multiple times more, depending on the number of final master plans that are requested.
And the PD district was created, it wasn't always around. We created this because our intention was that we didn't want to have one site, one store pop up here, one store pop up there. We wanted to create an opportunity for a more cohesive development plan to come in place. So that was kind of the background on how this, where all the zoning codes got thrown out and this magical PD district opportunity came in. And ironically, our first one, I think our applicant's uniquely positioned, has a unique position of leverage to, cater to maybe have a little bit more stronger pull on what's going to go in there than you or I may have anticipated when or other PDs that come in. I think this is a sort of a unique applicant and a unique property. So that's kind of the layman's history too.
So it continues to go through public forum like this.
Yep.
And then planning and zoning approves it.
We'll make a recommendation to council.
Council makes all the big boy
Council-
decisions. We
council
just
will hear it again.
recommend, make recommendations.
All right. Other public comment?
Hi, Franz Stein. I was just more curious about this, like, community authority board, whatever. Does it have the ability to, like, issue debt for infrastructure, or, like, its powers, I guess?
So New Albany's, New Albany issued a bond, the city did, that was backed by the community authorities, so they got a better bond rating. It's pretty complex, probably something we're not gonna be able to explain to you in and make sense of at this meeting, but, you may be able to ask Sean.
There's a
or-
lot to it, and we do have a couple presentations that I'll send to you.
But they
We've had
can
a couple
issue-
presentations
they
on
can
it. We'll
back-
get you some more. We have a really good one by Bricker and Eckler that they came in and explained some things. We can send that one to you.
Thanks.
Yeah. All right. Any others? All right, great. Well, we definitely appreciate any public comment. So at this time, at the behest of our applicant, correct? At this time, you're requesting a tabling?
If I could jump in? as
Sure.
The procedural boring
Don't
guy.
leave it to us.
So in the 1164 of our particular code, there's a couple options that you all can do. I think obviously, discussion we had earlier, the desire is to table. However, it's not as simple as that. There are some wording that you all have to go through, some exercises that you have to put forth, and I just want to make sure that we follow all those proper procedures. So if you want to follow along, you can. Page 6 of the particular PD district code, request for an additional review information. In this review of the application, the Planning and Zoning Commission may request additional information deemed reasonably necessary to adequately review and evaluate the proposed development, and/or may request the applicant revise elements of the application. When this occurs, the Planning and Zoning Commission may table the application. So in order for you to table the application, those requirements, or some of those requirements, have to be met. I think we can speak somewhat broadly and generally, but if you want to mention maybe one of those or both of them, that you're leveling your logic on why you're tabling it. If not, then one of the actions has to be to approve with conditions, as Trevor, Thaddeus had mentioned earlier. Go ahead.
Yeah,
Jump in.
sure. You could do that, or if the applicant requests, I mean, that is fine as well.
However, if the legal counsel says we can.
Simple and short as the
You
applicant
are
is requesting?
Good.
Applicant requests.
Thank you.
Absolved.
So at this
It's on you,
time,
Trevor, or that, sorry.
at this time, at the applicant's request, we will make a motion, I will make a motion to table this application.
Second.
And can we have a roll call?
Ben Lee,
Yes.
Jesse Koppel,
Yes.
Chairman Green.
Yes.
Does that mean I can go home?
Not yet.
Oh.
I want to thank the public for coming. We'll proceed on with 2 more items of business here. Definitely understand if you guys head out now. And I want to thank you guys for hanging in there with us. You got sheets? Sheets down there?
10 minutes, 10 minutes.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, appreciate it. I have questions about every one of the zoning inspectors.
Tons of fun. Absolutely.
I didn't even get to read
This
it.
pen's a little, this pen's sharp. I'm pretty good at darts. All right.
I don't have any other questions.
All right, so the zoning inspector report, does anyone have any questions on that? Okay. So we will forego the zoning inspector's report. If you have any questions, please email those to Terry. I'm sure we'll be happy to answer those. Any other business?
Real quickly, just to give a recap, some things were transpiring at the last council meeting, and just keeping you all in the loop. There was some discussion about modifying section, GCC 1 code. We've been instructed as staff to do so, so we'll be modifying that to, from council's reference and desire, we believe we'll try to match that, and that is removing the transient capability. I've also looked at some other modifications rather than just looking at that one specifically, adding some additional GCC 1 wording that would be more consistent with some of the uses that we have down there. There was also a conversation of potentially adding a bed and breakfast use in conjunction with that. So what I'm going to do is look at Village Commercial District that was kind of intended to be more of a downtown focused, see some of the products that may exist in there, I hate having non-conforming uses in a district that are consistent with what you want. And one of those that I'll bring up would be kind of having the ability to have an event center. And I don't want to say center, maybe that's the wrong word, but we have businesses that are located down there, and I don't like to specifically call out businesses, but you guys are familiar with maybe two particular spots that utilize their space for gatherings. So maybe having a code written that has the allowability of those, or even conditionally. I'm going to work with MKSK and maybe insert some wording in there. Nothing too expansive, but I'm going to get that to council at the next meeting. I would have loved to have it before this meeting, but I can just honestly say I just didn't have the time. So I'm going to try to get that wording to council, but they have 2 readings of it typically. So you'll have an opportunity to weigh in on that. Obviously, the next council or zoning meeting will probably be a heavy lift as well, since the PD application will be back. But if anything else, I can just give you some text wording you can look over, and then you can reply individually, and then I can take that feedback back to council. In case you don't have the time after the next meeting, I'll at least get some feedback. That way zoning is driving some of that conversation. So just giving you the heads up.
All right.
I appreciate you including this in that step.
Try to do that.
All right, anything else? Anyone from our zoning commission? With that, I will make the motion to adjourn.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Snuck right up on you.
A restroom break.